Never correct. Well, you said there was two. Somebody asked me the same question. And I said, she's supposed to take that, so you do. You can in general, but you can't apply it.
Will lights come to the end today? Yeah, will. We did something wrong. Is Jason coming? And Ryan?
All right, we're officially in order. I think it's 1 minute after. You realize fussing around. We're going to have a call to order. We need a roll call.
Ms. Howe?
Here.
Ms. Butler-Chandler here. Mr. Wishauser?
Here.
Mr. Elmerigi?
Here.
Mr. Benzie?
Here.
Mr. Fewens-Bliss is absent. Mr. Rosecrans?
Here.
Thank you.
Okay. I did that. A little housekeeping that needs to be done.
Okay.
Oh, Brian's here.
Mark you in.
Any ambulance?
Well, okay. I had a bit of housekeeping to do, but yeah, we will. Yep. Okay, hang on. Well, I must have done something with it, but I'm going to say it anyway. It has to do with our minutes from, did we do this one, our January 22nd? That one was 21st?
January?
June, sorry. And it had to do with the comments that trustee Winglis made with regards to my being apparently. I know, but I'm doing housekeeping before that, so thank you. No, I appreciate that. Before we get to civil reflections, but, well, wherever it went, it had to do with the fact that it had been stated that I was apparently short with our staff, and, and the fact that I made an apology, but it did not get into our minutes. So I'm making another apology, the second one. And I wanted it to be put in the record. That's why I had it somewhere, because I wanted to make sure that it was clear and that Brenda had it so that she would, our clerk would have it, so she would know exactly what I was talking about. What I'm saying is that I will apologize again for the second time, and I wanted to go on the record so it's very clear that it was made for the apology. It had to do with staff, because I was accused of being able to make comments outside. And I wanted to make sure that it was understood that any comments that were made to staff was not done intentionally by any stretch. And that I totally disagree with trustee Winglis with regards to saying that I had made comments, which I didn't think I did, but that's okay. I wanted to make sure it was understood in the minutes this time, officially as he did, that those comments were not meant by any stretch. And I will apologize again to staff because that was something that was said, that I said, and I wanted to make sure it was understood that I did not, and that I do disagree. I do also want to make sure that it gets understood that I do not make those kind of comments publicly or privately to any of our staff. So I wanted to make sure that was in the record. And I will get you, okay, I have it somewhere, because I have you a copy. Anyway, that was all I had to do for my housekeeping. Was there any other housekeeping that needs to be done before we go into civil reflections?
I have a question. So
Yes.
it sounds to me that you're apologizing for something that you don't really want to get.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
That's absolutely correct. So make sure you put that in, that I do disagree. And that, yes, there was, so thank you. So Jason's comments would be in the record. Yes, I am disagreeing completely with it, but I will apologize, as I did at our last meeting in June, with regards to comments that were taken unofficially, as far as I was concerned, that had been made, and I did not make them to that degree. Okay. Is there anything else? I'm sorry, I can't find those. I feel somewhat discombobulated. We have, we did the roll calls. We have civil reflection, which has to do with Pledge of Allegiance, which we'll do, and then we'll have a moment of silence.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, we have an approval of the agenda.
I apologize. I know that you handed out prior to the meeting, Jeannie Brown's
Correct.
application, and I'm sorry that wasn't included. And I would also like to point out with the approval of the agenda that Chris Patterson from Fahey Schultz will be attending tonight to answer any questions any of you may have regarding the marijuana ordinances and issues that are on tonight's agenda. So I indicated that he could come after 7 o'clock. I don't know where we'll be at that time, but I didn't want him to sit through the SCUMA budget and the audit, so I indicated to him it might be prudent for him to arrive after 7.
And that'll be on the agenda, correct?
They are on the agenda.
Yeah, they're on the agenda.
Okay, do I have a motion for approving the agenda as amended?
So moved.
Mr. Rosecrans?
Yes.
Ms. Butler Challenger, yes. Ms. Howe?
Yes.
Mr. Wisswasser?
Yes.
Mr. Bensy?
Yes.
Mr. Almarigi?
Yes.
Mr. Fields-Bliss?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, we're on item 4, which is disclosure of conflict of interest. There doesn't appear to be any. Public statement. This will be the first one for 3 minutes. It has to be on current agenda. Anybody?
Go ahead, you first.
A couple of points here. Regarding the agenda, which has already been approved, a month ago, during the meeting, it was decided and I thought put into the minutes that the agenda would also include this month, why I'm always here, regarding the audio-visual equipment. That was agreed to by staff to Marie that would be on the agenda for this evening, July 18th, and if it's not. Okay.
Okay, if it's not on the agenda, then you'll have the second comments. These are for what's on the agenda at this point.
Agreed, but this should have been on the
I
agenda.
don't understand, but it's not on the agenda.
All right, I believe I made my point there. Also, I have a couple of questions. On the agenda this evening is the financial audit report, which just came out to be visible to the rest of us. And it's on an item for action this evening, which I'm wondering why that didn't come up as new business beforehand. And number 3 would be you're going to approve somebody for Board of Review this evening. And I have some questions regarding Board of Review. Last time I was here for the Board of Review, I was promised that I would be heard at tomorrow's Board of Review, and now apparently I have been unpromised. What was promised to me is now unavailable to me. The Board of Review is not handling tax exempt, what do I want to say, SERS, primary residence exemption. That's what I'm trying to spit out. So I would love to speak with any of you about that. If any of you have any free time this week, I have reached out to the tax assessor and been disregarded from my last statements. So would love to speak with any of you about that. Thank you very much. Any questions or comments for me?
Thank you. Anybody? Well,
Meg Ritchie, Underdrive. Thank you.
no, go ahead first. Joe.
Too bad you don't take questions from the internet, we'll be here all night. Will Tyler White, Main Street. I have a couple of questions about the financial audit report that was in the agenda tonight. It's listed Downtown Development Authority, DDA, is having $274,868 at the beginning of the year. And at the end of the year, nothing. Apparently there was $100,145 spent on community and economic development. Well, I never saw any of that happening. There's none of the DDA projects that have been done that were supposed to, this money was set aside for. So I'd like to know where that $100,145 was spent, what it was spent for, and why I didn't see any requests for proposals. I believe anything over 5,000 or 10,000 needs a competing blind quotes or blind bids. So I don't know what the heck is going on with there, but that needs to be accounted to. It says it was the last, after you spent the 100,000, the remaining 174,000 was transferred out. Doesn't say where it was transferred to. I assume the general fund. Well, you're supposed to be keeping track of that money and spending it only on Downtown Development Authority projects. That's another broken promise, if you ask me. The other thing I noticed was that the farmers market had revenues of $3,485, expenses of $12,000 for a net loss of $8,585. I know in the past the farmers market has gotten grants, but I don't see any of that reflected in this report. So I'd like some illumination on those two questions, or three questions, if you could, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. Is there anybody else for public comment? Okay. Item 6, which would be items from the county, state, federal, or other agencies. Adam? You're up.
Thanks. Thank you very much. The last we checked, we were at the last point I've checked with, I think almost all the municipalities and townships in the county have at least given us a letter of support for the broadband effort that's going on. I believe Eagle and Victor have turned over their federal funds over to the to go along with the $3 million of county funds that we've set aside. I'm getting an update tomorrow from Adam Smitty, so I don't know what the current status is, but I haven't actually come back to you guys in the last 30 days, so has there been a determination by the Bath Township Board about what contribution you're making? And you've relayed that to the county?
I forwarded the letter of intent to Adam, and he should have shared that with the county commissioners.
Okay, okay. with a financial range or just the support?
Correct. No,
Okay.
there's finances involved.
Good. So tomorrow, or not tomorrow, Thursday, we're going to be forming a task force, not a committee. I hate committees, they just sit around and exist for existing. But this will be a broadband task force. It's going to have 9 representatives, and that's going to kind of make a lot of the decisions about, you know, where the focus is going to be first, because obviously we're not going to be able to build out the entire county at the same time. So there's going to be 9 people at 2 county commissioners, county government administrator, it's going to be Craig, an internet service provider, it's one of the guys, a public schools representative, so DAF would have a chance as a public schools representative to get a person on there. A business community representative, probably going to be someone from St. John's, but definitely there's an opportunity for someone from DAF. If you had someone in mind, or maybe someone with works at BSNA, if they've got some ideas about that. A Clinton County Community Development designee. I don't know what that person's going to be. An agricultural community representative. Definitely, there's an opportunity for someone from BAF if they want to fill in that agricultural role, and a local government representative, which once again, definitely an opportunity for someone from BAF. Definitely someone from BAF, at least one person from BAF, hopefully it'd be 2, but definitely someone from BAF should be on there. I don't know how the balancing act is going to go to make sure we get representation that kind of pieces together. At least all the financial contributing partners are going to have some voice on that board. That's going to be formed on Thursday, formally take an action at the end of the July meeting, and then we'll go over and start accepting nominations for all those different slots that are there.
Are you looking for a resume? Are you looking for,
I
does
think
someone throw their name in the hat?
No, I think we've got a standard form in the site. It's just for, when we have openings at the planning commission, other boards, and boy, do we keep getting openings at the planning. We got another opening coming up at the planning commission. So Mark Simon, due to health, is resigned, so we're going to have to replace Mark Simon. He's been at planning commission and zoning law for like 17 years. There's another gentleman who's not able to be present, but he's hoping that his health situation will improve. But yeah, we could have a few more people on the planning commission, which obviously doesn't directly affect you because you control your own planning and zoning, but affects most of the rest of the county too.
So basically, go to your website to find an application or whatever. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll have a link there about how to apply. But definitely we'll staff that committee up, and that'll be important to make sure that obviously BAF's been at the forefront, Victor's been at the forefront. Those 2 communities should definitely have a considerable seat on here. This is an interesting opportunity because normally in this county, DeWitt has got the punching power, but since DeWitt is already built out for high-speed internet, they're actually not going to have the kind of say that you would traditionally think they would at a county-wide effort. So opportunity here for BAF and Victor, since this is where the primary focus is on a lot of the talk about building out internet. Definitely a chance to get on that board. And obviously, 2 commission members. We could put both the BAF commissioners on there. That'd be nice for the remainder of the year, and then hopefully one of us will serve on it. After January 1st.
So this is going to go beyond this year.
Yeah, obviously, because we're only going to make that first grant opportunity, this summer, fall, and if we get the awards, we'll get the award later in the year, and then the building won't even take place until construction season in '23. So definitely a multi-year process. Just like the review of the public safety facility, that's definitely going to be a multi-year process. No one's in any hurry to do any digging or construction right now with the sky-high prices. I mean, I'm seeing people's jaws drop on just small items that they thought would go out to bid for like $2.5 million is coming in at $5 million. It's a mixture of, right now our consultants are telling us it's a mixture of 50% materials increase and 50% labor increase. Now the labor prices are not going to go down. That's going to stay that way built in going forward. The materials prices hopefully will come down, depending on the economy. Unfortunately, if we're heading into a recession, that probably will take care of a lot of the building of material prices, and that'll sag due to less demand out there right now. Because demand is what's driving everything. That's what's driving inflation, is demand right now. But that's it's for the county level. So
Adam, can I ask
Yeah, go ahead.
regarding the broadband? It was hard for us to get our arms around how much of the county's ARPA money they were going to put in? 3
Out
million?
of the 15 million, we've dedicated 3 million to that. It could be more, but that's definitely our major commitment. Obviously, with other, capital improvement projects going forward, I don't know if we're gonna be able to squeeze any more over there, in the short term. Because out of the 15 million, 3 million was gonna go to the broadband. We've set aside about 9 million into the public improvement fund, which can be used for anything we see fit. It'll probably go into building projects, but, depending on if our matching grants don't come in quite as high, if we're short something manageable, we could definitely tap that into there.
That's great, thank you.
Any other questions on that?
That does it.
Okay, so,
I don't think there's anybody else, is there?
great. I got an anniversary dinner to run to, so.
Happy anniversary. Okay, our next, now, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Madhu Anderson. I'm a candidate for the state senate in District 28. Are you all familiar with the new districts? Okay, good. Not everyone is, so I don't ask. I'm a resident of Bath Township. I've lived here over 20 years. My husband and I have raised 3 children here. My husband has a small business that he's grown up in the area. My background is that I've worked in public policy for over 25 years. I've worked in state tax policy as well as in environmental and energy policy. So I have a broad policy background. I'm currently on leave from a global conservation organization while I run this campaign. I have a couple of priorities that I'll just mention to you, and then perhaps sometime we can talk about it. I'll leave some information with you and you can give me a call at another time. I want to make sure that we bring down the cost of living and lower the tax burden for our residents of our state and for this district. Also improve our business climate. It's really important for this area, this central Michigan area, to have good paying jobs for our kids and our future. And finally, I'd like to improve our educational qualities and choices for our students in the district. The primary is August 2nd, you all know that, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if you want to give me a call, but thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, Madhu. Just as a side note, I've known Madhu for many years in the legislature, so just so you all know that. I just want to make sure that was clear. It's not a conflict, but it is to let you know that I have known her for many years. Opposite sides, but many years. That's good. Okay. Brad, you're last.
That's all right. Thank you, trustees. I'll be as brief as possible. I know you get a long agenda tonight. But ultimately, I'm here to present and kind of cover the highlights of the proposed draft 23 SCCMUA budget. For the 23 budget, we're looking at 2.7% increase. We are very happy with that minimal increase, considering operational expenses related to Commissioner Stacy. And of course, all you know, cost of doing basically anything is increasing at a rapid rate. The things we're doing to kind of mitigate those risks, as we've seen well over a couple 100% increases in chemical costs alone. We've switched some of our products that we use ultimately to reduce those costs and increase efficiencies and safeties. We've also increased policies to reduce our day-to-day chemical usage. So ultimately, our strategy is to make our chemical changes daily and even multiple times a day to try to reduce that risk and obligation in those usages. Also, MERS, as everybody knows, continues to have a liability there. We've made some strong headways in the last 4 to 5 years as we've continued to pay extra in our MERS fund. This year, based off 2020 actuarial, we're paying an additional $31,000. That puts us at a projected about 86% funding ratio. That's a pretty good spot to be in today's market. Of course, next year that might be something different. But we feel like we're in a good spot in all of our divisions. Defined benefit divisions are closed and have been for some time. So we're near that plateau, and we should see decreases coming rather quickly. The other highlight, of course, increased costs related to energy usage. The upcoming project that we're hoping to move forward with in 2023 will significantly reduce those energy costs and ultimately reduce 2 out of the 3 chemicals used. So even with the development of our SRF project plan, we've considered the impacts that we've seen in the last 2 years related to commodity pricing in that project to help reduce our future cost and footprint related to those usages. And again, continuing on, I guess, with related more directly to the Bath project, we've worked closely with the township engineers on the proposed master plan activities and the SRF functions, trying to help share what information we have to make that as smooth and cost effective as possible, while keeping a positive influence on the system and mitigating risk to the system. That system is particularly complex due to its detention times and pumping ratios for each gallon. But ultimately, we addressed a lot of those issues. There will continue to be issues in the long term, but there's not much we can do besides change those chemicals we're introducing into the system, and ultimately some of the treatment processes within the actual collection system alone. So we've instituted a treatment process right in the wet wells here through aeration. That's to help reduce odors and corrosion as it transfers through the system. That has decreased chemical usage over in Bath significantly. So those are some of the high-level overviews of the overall budget and Bath system. I'm happy to answer any particular questions related to the budget if you've had a chance to go through it.
I have a question, but not on the budget.
Sure.
A couple items of curiosity. So what does SCUMA do with the resulting sludge after treatment?
Sure. So after treatment, the biosolids are land applied to local farmers. Those range all over the central Michigan area, depending on weather conditions. Like, we kind of transfer that sludge based on dry areas, wet areas, sandy, clay areas. It just depends on where we can get it. But as it stands now, all of it is land applied.
Land applied to food-based products?
Nope, no food based. Biosolids cannot be land applied to food products, human consumption products.
Okay.
So
these would be what, like soybeans or
right,
cattle?
soybeans,
Like,
yep.
now, does SCUMA test for PFAS?
We do. Yep. We recently got that reduced. We were doing it monthly. As most know, we do treat landfill leachate, which obviously has some levels of PFOS in it, some measurable in some of the 27 compounds, and that number continues to increase. That being said, we've been non-detect for a large majority of the year, which has reduced our requirement to quarterly. Our biosolids level was 8.
Okay. And the final question is, any conversations, think about future liability related to PFAS?
Yep. So those conversations have been had actually with the contributor, so the contributing source. They're conducting studies along with the SCUMA board and kind of partnership there on how to treat this. This was obviously a very important situation, but it's a difficult situation to solve. Technology isn't quite there to treat some of the matrix, but that's evolving. They've spent a significant amount of funds researching this. They're working with MSU as a partnership, developing some treatment processes, pilot, and we're right there with them. So,
thank you.
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
If my math is correct, we're looking at about $55,000 more. Sorry, I didn't mean to catch you off guard. I just want to make sure I'm looking at this right. It's about $4,500, $4,600 more a month.
Yep.
Okay.
No. Yep.
Thank you.
And if you do the math on that, it's more like 3.3%.
Yeah.
But understand that 2.7 is operational expenses. The additional expense comes from CIP items, which is not reflected in that 2.7%. So our CIP sorry, I guess I should elaborate on that, if you do the math. The CIP is ultimately a 30-year CIP. We plan that, instead of depreciating, we plan for a CIP replacement of all items related to SCUMA. We reserve those funds accordingly, and particularly since inflation has hit everything hard, the CIP has echoed that reflection as well. So the updated CIP had some significant impacts related to some inflationary items, largely around our food.
All right. Is there any questions, comments? Doesn't hear me, as always, thank you.
Absolutely.
Yes,
Thanks, everyone.
thank you, greatly appreciated. All right, item 7, which is our consent agenda. I do have a question before we go ahead and pass that. Does anybody else have a question? Another one? Okay. What I have a question about is your minutes for your recreational advisory committee. That was removed last month and put in another area, but, yeah.
I failed to remove them again, yeah, so if you'd like to do that again.
That's entirely, I was going to go ahead and move it to items for action, G, but, we can discuss it in offline. Kind of up to you guys.
I don't know what you're talking about. Can you tell us?
Sure. On here, it says the minutes of the Recreational Advisory Committee meeting for May 9th. That was off the agenda, only because we didn't have time. So it should have been on this agenda.
But it is. It's here in the consent agenda.
I know, but it shouldn't be in the consent agenda, because it was already taken out of the consent agenda.
You have things you want to talk about for it.
Yeah, that was, I had some questions on it, so I took it out, but it wasn't shown here on our agenda that it was taken out, only because we ran out of time.
So you're requesting to pull it out again?
Do I need, well, I can, if you want to pull it out again. That's-
I don't want to. You said you have questions on it, right?
I failed to list it
She listed
separately,
it.
so.
Yeah, I'm just trying to
Okay.
make sure I understand what we're trying to do. You have the right to pull anything out, so.
I know, and I did, I pulled it out last month, but it's not showing that
Right,
it was out.
but you want to do it
Back
now,
in.
again.
So I want to move for the consent agenda, the minutes of Recreation Advisory Committee meeting of May 9th to G as in George, under items for action, B. Only for discussion, we can pass it. That's an item for action, so it can be passed.
Are we adjusting the agenda that we've already accepted?
Yes, we are.
Oh, we haven't.
Well,
Well,
yeah, we
B,
did. We have the approval of the agenda.
What is it we're discussing? I didn't hear that part.
No. Did you fall asleep?
You got pretty warmed up in your conversation, I didn't hear that part, sorry.
No, what it was, it's in the consent agenda, minutes for the recreational advisory committee, which was pulled last,
Yeah,
last
that's
month.
all I can think of.
Okay, we want to pass the consent agenda as amended? Again,
Make the motion to pass consent agenda as amended.
Also,
thank you.
and where are you moving it?
Pardon?
You moving it
Yes,
to what now?
to G.
G,
Where items for
after,
action.
down the bottom.
Yep,
Okay.
thank you.
Ms. Butler Challenger, yes. Ms. Howe?
Yes,
Mr. Wisswasser?
yes.
Mr. Dempsey?
Yes.
Mr. Almarigi?
No.
Mr. Funes Bliss?
Yes.
Mr. Rosecrans?
No.
Thank you.
I know. You're going to say, meant to pass.
Okay.
It passed, okay. We have approval of the minutes. Is there any other questions? The minutes, are you good?
That's in the motion.
I know, I'm ready for any other.
I'll make the motion to approve the minutes as submitted.
Ms. Howe?
Yes.
Mr. Wisswasser?
Yes.
Mr. Bensy?
yes,
Mr. Almarigi?
Yes.
Mr. Fields-Bliss?
Yes.
Mr. Rosecrans?
Yes.
Ms. Butler Challenger? Yes.
Okay, item 9, which is the approval of vouchers.
Move to accept the vouchers as presented.
Second?
Mr. Wisswasser?
Yes.
Mr. Bensy?
yes,
Mr. Almarigi?
Yes.
Mr. Fields-Bliss?
Yes.
Mr. Rosecrans?
Yes.
Ms. Butler Challenger, yes. Ms. Howe?
Yes. All right, item 10, which is a treasury report, there's no attachment, but,
The only thing I have for you tonight, folks, waiting for a couple more bank statements before I have my second quarter investment report for you. Next meeting I'll have that, but, I do have, confirmation and the money is there and I've actually moved it to the appropriate bank account. That is deposited in the general fund, we moved it to our ARPA funds account, we did get our remaining, EFT for the amount from the federal government for $683,279.08. That puts us at 1.3 million, 66,000 and some change. Total we have in the account, had that number top of my head and I lost it for some reason. I didn't write it all down here. But I'll have that for you this next board meeting. That is in a separate account. There's been more of this trustee Benzie and I was discussing before the meeting. There's been more rule changes on what you can do with that money since this came out than what you could personally keep up with. But that is an interest-bearing account of its own, that is bearing interest every month. But we've been having a few issues with fees, but I think we got that cornered and figured out here, and they're refunding us our money for that from the bank. But that's all I have for you for tonight. I can give you a better, if you want a bank statement, I can print that off and give it to you if you'd like it. Redacting our information up those from there. Yeah.
to repeat it, I'm sorry, I'm sitting right next to you. 1.3 million is in what account? Is that-
Was you sleeping?
I was sleeping. I was, my mind was other places, because I know we're just too efficient.
What, in what account? It's in the ARPA funds.
Oh.
It's got its own fund. It's got its own,
Oh,
it's got its
okay,
own
so I
bank
will-
account. It
okay.
has its own bank account. It actually has
Yep.
its own general ledger number, its own fund number.
Right,
And in accordance to the fact that we haven't spent any money, it's correct. It's in the correct place.
okay, so it's 1.3 million in our ARPA, okay,
Yes.
thank you. Yeah, that's something. Greatly appreciate it.
That's all right.
Okay. Item 12, which is unfinished, or 13, which is unfinished business.
I think we're on 11.
11.
Oh, have I gone too far? I've gone too far. Committee appointment, oh, that's mine. See, I was gonna skip right over that. Sorry about that. Okay. Item 12, Township Committee Report. We have it because it was not in the packet. So this one has to do again with Jeannie Brown.
speaking of these,
Yes. Did I skip 11? Committee, that's what I'm doing, committee appointment. So board review. Yes, I tried to, but we came back to it. You guys are sharper than I am tonight.
would you want us to fill Mrs. Brown?
Again, yes, it was asked, I can't remember which one of you asked, that she then, right, that talked about her being a member as opposed to an alternate. So that's basically what you're approving. And she did fill out a new form. She did that, was it June 28th? And it was obviously confirmed. Anybody got a second committee appointment?
Did someone make a motion?
Or a motion to, well, I made the motion.
I'll make a motion to
Okay,
appoint Mrs. Brown to a full-time board of review slot term ending December 31st, 2022.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Bensy?
Yes,
Mr. Almarigi?
Yes.
Mr. Fields-Bliss?
Yes.
Mr. Rosecrans?
Yes.
Ms. Butler Challenger, yes. Ms. Howe?
yes.
Mr. Wisswasser?
Yes.
Okay.
Marie,
Yes,
now are you gonna put somebody in her position?
There is an alternate. In fact, you appointed her as the alternate.
It's Tamika Booth Riley. She was in your packet, and I had asked for a correction of her term based on the fact that she was appointed for 2022, starting January 1st, 2022, or 23. 23, thank you. 22. Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
And we had wanted her to fulfill the rest of the term for Janine.
Because
Okay.
they do elections again.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you all for clarification. Now we can go to 12, the township. I'm sorry.
Are you saying that we approved?
Yes,
Okay, we made no motion or votes on the last
yeah, we did, because there were two. There were
I made the motion.
meeting. Okay.
Was it 2 meetings ago?
It was the
Well,
last meeting, June 21st.
because we only had,
I believe it was 2 meetings ago that we actually,
Yeah.
you all actually voted on it. We brought it back to discuss the
Okay.
term last meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
yeah, isn't that the mother of the brother? Anyway, yeah, okay. Any other questions? Okay, there doesn't appear, item 12, your township committee reports, there doesn't seem to be any. Judy, unusual. Here, well, I see his eyes. Okay. You're just here to visit? That's good. Unfinished business, item 13, says items for introduction and discussion. We're back with the adult use, I always say cannabis, but marijuana establishment. I think that's your,
Yes, thank you. Tonight we have with us too Chris Patterson, in case you have any questions. This is a process that we developed in conjunction with each other. I didn't intend for you to have a red line version, so I hope that didn't confuse you, because it wasn't a process that you had seen before, so you wouldn't know what was changed or different. So my intention was that you see just the clean version. But there are a couple of corrections that are needed in that version, and one of them is on the first page. It refers to the township supervisor or their agent in number 6, and that needs to be corrected to the superintendent. And I just wanted to hit the corrections really quick, and then we can talk about the process. And then on the second page, under B, determination to award permits, item number 3, says 1,000 feet, and that was actually changed in the ordinance that you're gonna get tonight, and that would be 500 feet. So those will come back before you next time for some action, but this is basically the process that we will launch to open up the competitive process, which will be published in the paper and shall be open for approximately 2 weeks in order to accept applications for permits. One for the recreational, the selling, retail, excuse me, and then the other permits that we have available to the community, for our community. If you have questions about the process, we can talk about them, but I don't know how you'd like to go through this, or if you've read it on your own, I don't have any questions, so.
anybody got any comments? Right, my only comment, I've read through this, maybe Mr. Patterson can help out. It appears to be a lot of power in this one position. So my thought is, why can't we have a panel, like 3, 2 trustees and staff? That's what my initial thought is, so.
In what part of the process were you referring to?
All of it, where you end up with a procedure
Okay.
that you, as the
So-
superintendent,
so-
decides whether or not this moves forward
No.
to go. Okay.
So I open up the process
Okay.
and announce that it's available. And matter of fact, we will publish it in the paper.
Correct.
And we have a list of business people that have signed up to be notified when this opens up in various, they're interested in various permits. And then all the applications that come in will come before the board.
No, I understand that.
Okay.
I'm still thinking that that's a lot of power in one position.
Okay.
So I'm looking at more or less a panel,
What's the power?
because because the position includes having to decide on something that this board has really had trouble struggling with, and the other board had trouble struggling with. So the power is that regardless of whether or not it comes in, we don't know that it comes in. And not that I don't trust what's happening.
And actually, they pay a fee and there's a receipt that goes along with that?
There should be, and that should be available,
Okay.
to everyone. It's just a clarity of being able to say, with this panel, we'll make these decisions. That's all it is.
Are you suggesting that someone else other than the front desk take the
Yes,
applications?
I'm suggesting that there be a panel of 2 of our trustees involved in it with one of our staff. No, go ahead, Jason.
I'm a bit confused here. I want to clarify my understanding. My read of this is that the entire board will review every application.
That's correct.
And then we will each vote, and those votes will be what's compiled into a score that will then be acted upon. My further understanding is that any codified application process will be reviewed and approved by the board, right? So the only thing that is in the hands of the superintendent is the scheduling. Is that right? Of when the application window will open and close? And then the management of, from the staff will manage the application. Of course, we have clerk and treasurer who will be handling the money and the documentation.
And that can be one of the trustees. All I'm saying is, this is really an important piece, and to narrow it, I'm not so sure that that needs to be done or should be done, because this is such an important issue that I would be looking at, from my standpoint, a panel of sorts to be able to make all those decisions exactly as you're
Is
discussing.
the panel gonna sit in the front office for 2 weeks?
The panel is going to sit when it needs to sit.
But if I open up the application period, people can come in throughout the 2 weeks
Sure.
and pay their money and submit their application.
That's correct.
You gonna have trustees take their money?
I'm sorry, what?
You gonna have trustees take their money?
No, that's not.
That's what they
you
do.
said.
No, I said the panel would make the decisions as to where it's happening and what's going on. If you want to look at the minutia of the dollar amount, then the panel decides, yes, that came in, that was told, Brenda can do it or whoever can do it. That's only my thought.
So you're saying instead of the board reviewing it all, the panel does?
No, the panel brings it to the board. Panel will, or the board will always review it. All I'm saying is that when you have this initial process, that a panel would be a good piece to start out.
Could
But
you,
that's
I'm
my
sorry,
thought.
could you articulate what the panel is doing again?
The panel is doing everything that the superintendent would do with that superintendent as being the staff that would work with,
Those are the things that Jason outlined.
yes.
You told him no.
No, he outlined what it is that this piece of paper says, and I agree with that, except that I would like to see it go to a panel. So you all can vote on what you want, what you don't want. That's okay. My thought is that it needs to have a panel, because this is a very, very important piece that needs to be done. No, that's-
I appreciate, I think what you're doing in terms of ensuring that we have a very open and transparent process. And I think that's something we all value. I think where I'm confused is where there's lack of transparency in the current handling of what township staff would do as a process, because I'm assuming that I know that there are control mechanisms to ensure that any transaction that is done from someone walking in the door to information that will be provided to us will all be accounted for. And so I'm not sure where there might be an opportunity for something non-transparent or something untoward happening in this process. And so I'm open to, learning more about, where the concerns are, but I think I need more concrete information about what you feel is not effective.
all I'm saying is that for me, a panel would be more productive from the standpoint of being able to make those decisions when in fact applications come in, when in fact they have to discuss them. If you don't want to do it, that's fine. I'm saying that's just my thought, is a panel would be a good thing to have. Now, if you're not real clear on the accountability of it, the accountability falls here, which again, we have to make a decision, you know, when in fact that does come to us. So, for me personally, and this is part of, you know, what the decision has to be. For me personally, a panel makes more sense than one individual to allow it. So, that's okay.
Would
No,
it,
that's- no,
would it be amenable to you if the board were asked to provide approval for details on the application start and close date?
no, that's okay. No, what I want is a panel. That's how I look at it, because it's just a very, very important piece that we have to do. So I don't know if Mr. Patterson has any other comments with it, but for me, if that's what you want to vote on, please feel free. That's entirely up to this board.
It just feels like there's not a lot of detail in what you're describing. It feels like you
It's
just
already-
don't want the superintendent to do
Oh,
it.
no, no, of course you would,
that's
no,
exactly
that is not true. It has nothing, because she's gonna be on the panel. Or whatever superintendent is here is gonna be on the panel. That's okay,
What's okay?
however you wanna vote.
Oh, I know, I don't need you to say that.
No, I know, it's, of course you do. No.
I
that's-
don't,
No,
actually.
you don't need my permission to do. You vote whatever way you want. All I'm saying is a panel, to me, makes more sense than one individual doing, regardless of the fact that, yes, you will have a determination of what it is that you want to do, so. If you're ready to vote for it, we have a,
I'm not asking for, it was an introduction discussion
Okay.
tonight.
Yeah.
To just get everybody's
Yes.
feedback, so it'll come back to you with the two corrections that I outlined, and
that's what I, okay.
I do have a question.
please.
So,
I know there's not page numbers on it too, so.
first I'll say,
Yeah, that would be
I appreciate the red line version, so I
Oh,
know
okay.
exactly where the changes.
Oh, okay.
have been made.
Well, over that.
That's-
Mine's in blue.
Yeah, so under section 2(1)(b)(4), so this is under competitive review, evaluation procedures, determination of board permits. I wanted to better understand this part where if there are two or more qualified applicants, I just maybe went, I'll say it in my words and maybe it's incorrect, so correct me if I'm wrong. So if there are two or more qualified applicants per the review process, the highest scoring one will be moved to provisional or conditional approval, and then the lower performing applicants may be granted conditional approval subject to following conditions, and that's, I'm trying to, and that's if the big one there is that they move to a qualified, to a location that would then qualify, is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
So that, what's the advantage there versus the advantage of simply rejecting and asking them to reapply for a site that would qualify?
Because with, and I was gonna say, if it, I can answer it, but I'm not gonna be as eloquent as Mr. Patterson.
Good evening, board members. Chris Patterson. I appreciate the opportunity. With respect to the specific section that you're seeking, it's actually put in there, it's actually, and it's permissive, ideally for if the board gets in a position that they're not interested in redoing the competitive review process, because remember that it would require us to reopen an application depending on the number of available permits, which may not even occur if the individual who was best suited, who does go through zoning, get approval. So it's sort of put in there as almost an ability for, in the board's discretion to have a safety valve where you could identify these lower scored applicants, let them sort of sit in this pool for 365 days to see if zoning is going to work out on the main location, as opposed to restarting the entire process. It especially sort of potentially is not even a scenario that arises in the license type that you have where it's a super limited number. Because if you're gonna have, for instance, one retailer, then essentially once you pick that one location, you don't necessarily even need to use that permissive clause. So it's sitting out there as sort of a potential hypothetical that could exist, that potentially allows an ability to short circuit some administrative processing if there's some indication that zoning approval may not occur for that had the highest score. That's about the only reason.
So since we're in the hypothetical space, let me throw out a different hypothetical. So say we received 2 applications, both are decent applications for the scoring a rubric. We give conditional approval to the highest scoring one, and then the second scoring one, because of some location discrepancy or location challenge, they're given the conditional approval, but they can't put it in one location. Wouldn't that applicant be motivated to then go and find a parcel and purchase a parcel, considering that's conditional approval?
And I guess I'm not foreshadowing where you're headed. What's the downside of potentially identifying the 2 qualified applicants, and if you have enough permits available for them to then identify a potential space that doesn't have a separation distance setback?
So remind me, we're only allowing one provisioning center permit, is that correct?
Yes. Correct.
Okay. So I'm confused as how this condition then helps, because if we give conditional approval to one, it's simply so that they don't have to go through the process again. If that first applicant.
At this point in time, when you do the competitive review process, this assumes that they're not going to go through zoning first. They're going through the police power process first, they're getting the conditional approval right before they can go with zoning. But we don't exactly know if they will satisfy all of the standards of zoning. Because with respect to any special land use, you have general standards. Those general standards provide discretionary approval to the planning commission. Right? So if you have location A, that approval ends up getting denied, even though that was the best qualified applicant. If you exercise your discretion to select a next applicant, they potentially could proceed forward, even with the location that they have. There may be no separation issue presented. So the other idea, the more straightforward process, is you just basically, if you have one available permit, you don't exercise that discretion, you select one qualified applicant, and they just proceed forward. And then you presume that zoning will work out, that they will meet all the requirements of site plan approval, and you presume that the zoning body in charge with the discretion to apply the general special land use standards assumes that everything's met, that it's harmonious, there's no impact to infrastructure, et cetera. They check all those boxes and they get that zoning approval and move forward.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any more questions?
Thank you.
You shut them
I
down.
do have one other question. Sorry.
Please.
I'm curious about the rationale for having the setback distance between 2 types of facilities, from 1,000 feet to 500 feet.
The change in that, or the actual purpose behind the setback?
The purpose behind reducing the setback from 1,000 feet to 500 feet.
So the purpose behind actually reducing it from 1,000 to 500 is in working with staff and analyzing sort of within there's a little bit of a corollary related part, which is a zoning amendment and an overlay that we're going to talk about. But in analyzing the distances within that overlay and looking at the 1,000 versus the 500, we potentially end up eliminating locations where licensees may locate, not able to even sort of meet any of the quotas that are set by the board. So I think I would suggest sort of maybe the appropriate term is it was done in a conservative measure to make sure that the separation of distances between establishments doesn't end up sort of being a roadblock to sort of administering and licensing under the ordinance. And I know Miles can certainly speak to that, but I know that the size of sort of those areas, especially at 1,000 feet, can potentially be kind of limiting with the outside boundaries of the areas where you're allowing them.
Thank you, Chris. Questions? Greatly appreciated.
He'll be back.
Well, I'm sure. It's, okay. That was under introduction and discussion. Is there any other points that you want to make? Okay. Items for action, B. Now it's the audit.
Okay. Hello, I'm Josh Gabriel, so I'm the superintendent over. Thanks for having me. I guess what I'd like to do is just start by going through your annual financial report that got filed with the state in June before the June 30 deadline. I'm sorry I couldn't make it to the June meeting because of the holiday. I had 2 board meetings on that Tuesday and couldn't be in 2 places at once, so you guys graciously let me come to this meeting. There's no need to do the board presentation before the audit gets filed. That's just some places like it, some people don't care either way. So, can everyone hear me? Okay. Does everyone have a copy of the audit in front of them? I'm just gonna quick go through some highlights as I see it, and I'll open up to questions. But feel free to stop me at any point if you do have a question of what I'm going through. I'm just gonna start on page 1, the independent auditors report. That's the report that you hired us to do. So we came in and gave an opinion on your financial statements. And as you can see, the very first bullet point there is that in our opinion, the financial statements are presented fairly. So that's basically how we give you your pass-fail as auditors with our fluffy wording. And then the rest of the letter just goes through everyone else's responsibilities, what makes up the financial statements, and the date of our report. And then, because I'm a nerdy accountant, I'm more focused on the numbers, so that's where I'd like to focus your attention next is down to page 13. This is the governmental funds, where you guys try to make most of your decisions based on the fund statements. And this shows your 3 major governmental funds and then a total column for the non-major funds. So you can see general fund there is the first column. You can see at the end, this is all as of December 31, so balance sheet is basically a snapshot of what you have in the bank and what you owe at December 31st. So you can see almost $3 million in cash, $1.6 million in investments, almost $1.5 million in total receivables for total assets of $6 million in general fund and just under $10 million in total assets. And then liabilities, what you owed to creditors as of December 31st. You can see general fund owed $217 to outside vendors and $131 in other accrued liabilities. And I'd like to highlight a new line there, unearned revenue it has $680,000 and that's in the ARPA fund. So again, like Steve mentioned earlier, ARPA keeps coming out with new rules for this money, and their rule is it's unearned revenue until you spend it. So once you decide what it's going to be spent on, that's when you would recognize revenue in the financial statements to offset that expense. So because you hadn't spent anything as of December 31st, the whole amount's sitting in unearned revenue. And then another new line is unavailable revenue under deferred inflows. It has $217,000. The state did a census adjustment for state shared revenue, and because the population increased in that 2020 census count, the population of that increased, so you should have been getting more money in your state shared revenue every month or every other month. But they did a catch-up bucket in April 2022, so there's $217,000 you got in cash, but it wasn't earned, or you were going to get in cash in April, but we wanted to reflect that back in December because you really earned it from the time the census count happened in 2020 till 2022 when the actual cash came in, if that makes sense. It's a silly accounting rule. As of today, you have that cash, so everything's good, but just at December 31st, it looks a little different than it has in the past. And then I'd like to focus on page 15.
Can I ask you a question? Have you put something out while we're on page 13?
Yeah.
If you look at the restricted revenues and fund balance, there's a figure of 183,210, which is made up of 174,210 of the DDA money, which the question was asked earlier tonight in the boardroom.
Yep.
Where the money money was. This money is restricted to the DDA district.
Correct.
And not, there is no more DDA fund, because the DDA fund is not in existence anymore. It's in the district. The money is actually still in the DDA bank account, and I was told by the auditors as well as our accounting staff that I can legally maintain that account, which I will, for the period of time in which money, the funds have, we have the money. That way we have a better accounting of it for that money. Incidentally, the 100,000, I gotta go back, flip pages here. The 100,145, I believe in your audit on page 64 reflects the amount of money that is due to LCC, that's the community college, which is their share, which we have to make them whole. When we dissolve the DDA, that money goes back to them. We have not yet reached out to them. We will now that the audit is official, now that we had this presentation. It was official on June 30th by the deadline, but we will at this time. The idea is to ask LCC if they'd be interested in partnering with us and doing some sort of shared process for possible for, I believe that we asked for scholarship type money towards our township. Don't hurt, that don't cost nothing to ask, I guess, but that, we'll revisit that when we get to that point. We're ready after tonight's presentation to contact the controller over there and see what she has to say.
Steve, can you repeat where that number is on page 13?
On page 13, they refer to it as restricted, and it says 183,210, but there's also some other funds that's in there that's restricted as well, not just the DDA money, but there's some other funds that make up that number. But the actual number that's restricted, if you look on page 13, or page 64, is 174,723.
Thank you.
Am I correct in stating this? Am I reading this all correct?
Yeah, really close. If you look on,
Rather be close.
yeah, page 44, I don't want to jump all around, but it's a good point, because that was brought up early. On page 44, it's note 9 to the financial statements. This describes in detail the different buckets of fund balance. So then you can see, I don't know if everyone's there yet, but on the far left, we have our fund balances. There's a committed section, and the third one in there is downtown development. And then if you slide to the right, you can see the 174,723 there. So it's actually in a committed pot for, so that just means it's committed to downtown revenue. It's
Correct.
one step under restricted.
That was a question from a resident that
Yeah.
was in the meeting earlier tonight, and what we did with the money.
Yeah, it's still sitting there, and it's
Still
still
sitting there.
bookmarked for DDA.
Just so that we're clear, what you're saying is that no one board member or multiple board members have stolen or pilfered this money?
No, it's sitting right there.
I know it's
just
insulting to you, and I don't mean it, but there are people who are spinning.
The money is still in the DDA bank account, and it will remain there, and I don't have to, that's the treasurer, I have that authority to do that. It will remain there until the money's gone, because that's a good way of accounting for it. It's another way of being transparent, what we have for the money and where it's at. And it's drawn interest. Actually, the settlement with LCC will probably be up a dollar or two with the way the rate of interest is these days.
Yep.
But that's why we do that way.
And just to clarify too, it didn't go into general fund. When it closed, you guys actually set up its own DDA fund, so it's being tracked. It's just not a component unit anymore. It's we call it a special revenue fund at the time. It's still there, it's still being tracked separately.
So on page 13, is it in the 426,000 under non-major governmental funds restricted?
It'll be under non-major, yep, and then it'll be actually in the committed pot there. The
Committed, the 335, okay, thanks.
So then on page 15, this shows the income statement of the fund again. And so the income statement, instead of being a snapshot in time, it's the entire fiscal year, so January 1st to December 31st, 2021. And you see the revenues there, you have taxes. I'm just gonna go in the total column here on the far right. We have about almost $3.5 million in taxes collected. Next biggest bucket is intergovernmental, almost 1.3, mainly state share revenue. for total revenues of 5.3, and then your expenditures, 1.7 for general government, 2 million for public safety, almost $1 million for public works, and about 380,000 for rec and culture. And then go down to the bottom of that page, you have net change in fund balance. As a whole, the governmental funds of the township increased by almost $375,000 during the fiscal year. So a beginning balance of 4.3 up to an ending balance of 4.7 million.
So that's the net change.
And then on page 17, we go back to a balance sheet, and this time of the sewer fund. So again, at December 31st, the sewer fund had cash of 2.3 million, accounts receivable of almost $500,000, and then about almost 12 million of capital assets. So that's the sewer fund's assets, mainly the sewer lines and share the sewer plant. And then liabilities are shown there. Got current debt of about 600,000, long-term debt of just under 6 million, and then an unrestricted net position of 5,985,000 at the end of the year. And then the next page, page 18, is the income statement show. So the annual revenues of 2.2 million in sewer charges for services, then your operating expenses, contracted services and depreciation expense. So you have operating income of 681,000, and then your non-operating revenues and expenses, mainly interest expense of 200,000, decreased that by 14,000. So your net position increased by 666,000 in the sewer fund during the year. And then last year, GASB 84 came into effect, and so that created two new statements. So I always like to point these out because I think they're pretty interesting. So on page 22, the tax fund is always a hot topic around townships. Like, all this money comes into the township, but I like how this report shows that of all the tax money that was collected, 18,476,000 doesn't stay in the township. That goes out to the schools that you collect for and the libraries that you collect for and all the other units. So that's always interesting to see that of all the taxes, your tax rate was 3.5 million, but 18.5 goes elsewhere. So a new report they made us put in.
Like other governments, does that include school systems?
Yeah, mainly schools, yeah. And the county, I guess, gets a pretty good share of that. But yeah.
State. Don't forget that.
Everyone likes a piece.
Everybody likes their money.
Yep. And then the last thing I want to point out is the budget, and this will be on page 47 and 48 is the general fund budgetary comparison schedule. So page 47 shows your budgeted revenues. At the bottom there, of page 47, your actual revenues were 3.3 million. Your budgeted revenues were just under 3.3 million, so you're 53,000 collected more than you budgeted for in revenues. And then expenditures on the next page, kind of in the middle there, there's a total expenditures row, and you budgeted for just under 3 million, so 2.9, and you spent 2.5, so you're 360,000 under budget in your expenditures. So that's what we have to report to the state is were you over budget in the expenditures, so we reported that you were not. So that's always a positive thing too. And then the number I like to point out is towards the bottom we have net changes in fund balance. So the second column there shows a negative 588,000. That's what you budgeted to happen to fund balance, that you would decrease fund balance by almost 600,000. But the next column there shows it only decreased by 140,000, so a positive 448,000 there. And those are all the highlights that I'd like to point out, but if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to look at them.
I have two.
Yeah.
Another resident mentioned the fact of why this wasn't brought before now, and this and that we are by law required to have this submitted to the state treasury along with several other reports on June 30th to meet our guidelines. That's why we did that way. But even if we weren't to do this, once you come in and you start your audit and do your audit's your audit. You don't discuss it here. You can discuss it all you want, but you don't change it here, there's no changes that can be made. It is what it is, and it can't be changed once it starts. It's the numbers are what the numbers are. So there's no discussion as far as making any changes or any amendments. What you're doing later here in this presentation, we're gonna accept and place it on file, and it'll be on file here at the board. It's already on file with state treasury, we've already been notified, we were congratulated, and everything is in accordance to what it's supposed to be. The other thing, I was gonna ask about, but there is no, we didn't talk about that in the front, but there is no comments, no management comments or anything else as far as anything that they found during the course of their audit that they found that we didn't address or didn't look at through the course of the year.
Yeah, you're one of our 3 clients that don't get a comment. So
How many clients do you have in the state?
119.
Yeah, I was gonna say. And you all do audits.
Yeah.
Quick question.
Yeah.
So, I'm not a financial person, but just out of curiosity, I saw this item here about custodial credit risk. Can you talk about that, and are there mechanisms to mitigate that risk?
Yeah, so the federally insured up to $250,000 per bank. You get $250 for time and $250 for demand, so checking and savings. So up to $500,000 per bank. So with the township, you had, what was there, like over $4 million in cash at the end of the year. So to get that all federally insured, you have to split it up that many different ways, in that many different banks. And that's the only way to eliminate that custodial credit risk. And a majority of our clients don't think it's worth the hassle, because usually you put it in a bank that doesn't really have a risk of closing, because that's really the only thing you're protecting yourself against, is if that bank closed up shop and took all your money, what you get made whole with. So as long as you're not putting it in like a bank that you think might go under, we don't see a big risk there, but it's just part of the standards that we do have to list that as a risk.
Okay, thank you.
2 questions.
Okay.
There is no draft then that you are submitting, I mean, Steve can answer that, as treasurer.
The draft goes to the treasurer.
Yeah, the draft
Okay.
was sent back in May
Okay.
and reviewed by staff, and it was prepared by your accountants, reviewed by us, and then sent back here for final review.
How many
So-
accountants do we have?
It just mainly because there's
That's
for
'cause they're
our, for our
maintenance.
account, for our
Okay.
accounts.
Yeah, they're
These
your
people are
monthly
auditors.
Right. Okay. The other one, could you explain or elaborate more on the 2 types of funds that we have? Government fund and business?
Yep,
Okay.
proprietary fund or a business type fund. So the
Right.
sewer fund, because the sewer fund operates more like a business, a typical business would, where you're trying to make a profit by having your charges that you're charging somebody cover your costs. A governmental fund is different because you don't really control all of the revenues that come in. The state's telling you what you're getting with state shared revenue, you can't change that. You have a little bit of leeway in millages, but again, those have to be approved by the community as a whole outside of the general fund. So that's why you track funds in the different restriction buckets, but the sewer fund is completely different because of how the
Because
charges
it is
are
a
made.
profit type, because that's a business.
Because it's trying to be self-sufficient.
Right.
And It's
But
not trying to just make a bunch of money, but it's trying to
No, I
cover its own
understand.
costs, yeah.
So a government fund then is what's spent to the township to function. The business fund is just the sewer, is that, okay?
Yep.
That's, which is SCUMA or our sewer?
Your sewer fund.
Okay. So SCUMA, their funds would be also business?
Yeah, if you went
Okay.
to their financial statements, they're their own entity.
Because we have we do financially submit to them.
Yeah, because they
Dollars,
basically
okay.
run your sewer system for you.
Okay, thank you.
I have their audit if you'd like to see it.
No, that's what Brad was doing.
That's the budget, not the audit.
No, I thought with him, the budget, because frankly, you did a really nice job. That's the first time, for me anyway, to be able to look at that. It brings up great questions for our budget time, which will be really nice to have. So it's greatly appreciated.
You're welcome.
All right, is there any other? Good job.
Okay, all right.
Good job.
Thanks again.
So I will move to accept the financial audit report for the year ending December 31st of 21 by Siegfried Campbell, PC.
So,
I was gonna say, careful, you might say something in
it's a lot of words.
It does. All right, do we have a second?
Joe did.
Oh, good. In there somewhere, you have a second? Okay, that's,
I think they got done.
no, it got done. All right. We'll vote.
Mr. Almarigi?
Yes.
Mr. Jones Bliss?
Yes.
Mr. Rosecrans?
Yes.
Ms. Butler Challenger, yes. Ms. Howe?
Yes.
Mr. Wisswasser?
Yes.
Mr. Benzi?
Yes.
Steve, could I draw maybe a question or your attention to something in here that I think we need to think about as the budgeting process goes through? Functionally, we went down in general fund balance, but the public safety fund balance went up. Virtually, those are the same dollars, right? We've moved them from one bucket to another bucket.
You initiated this year in 2022, or 2021, excuse me, it's the 21 audit. You started your public safety fund, and we was ahead of the rule a little bit for the uniform charter comps, which are gonna require us to make these changes in December of this year. But we started it early, so yes, that money was put in there, and that money was made in the way of fund balance. I believe it's $278 or something like that. I can't see the exact numbers. But that money originated all in the general fund, but it no longer is part of that. It's part of the public safety fund.
So I think that's something we should think through, because if we continue to do that year after year, we're basically moving money from the general fund balance to the public safety fund
It's
balance.
leftover money from the previous year, from 2021, but in 22 here, what that'll mean is there'll be less on general fund contribution you'll have to make. You'll be able to take in, or if you have any efficiency like we do, currently we're putting about $1 million out of the general fund to subsidize the police and fire departments, and that you're already 278,000 to the good. Towards that million, you're actually closer to 300,000 when you figure the fact that you're no longer gonna take any money out of the DDA district, and that should have been, it was earmarked for police and fire money, extra fund millage. That money now will go to public safety fund, so you're gonna realize another 25 to 30,000 depending on the development of the corridor or how much it develops.
But we won't be able.
300,000, so that puts your $1 million deficit back to about 700,000, and then you figure if we got any increased revenues from building and so on and so forth, keep in mind we have 9.1% inflation, but if you figure that into it, you get closer to having your public safety fund being a little more solid, just as what I asked for the board for patience for 1 year here, for one more time for voting for police and fire villages. I asked the board to be patient and let it ride one time and see what happens.
And so that'll pick up in fiscal year '23, right? Because we did not budget that $279,000 fund balance in public safety to be spent.
In 23 here for you, you're gonna start here this fall here, this late summer, you're gonna start negotiating the budget workshop for 2023. And that's correct. You'll have that money to start with regarding the,
Okay.
the tax part of it will come here and it'll be documented and since it's in the corridor out here on Webster Road, that'll come, all school taxes and villages and whatnot are collected in the rear, but that'll come in December, so you'll have that money as well, because the auditor will go back and it'll count back into December to see how much money was collected. When he does the audit for financial statements for 22. So you will realize about 300,000 more. I mean, I may have been playing a little bit of euchre, I may have passed you dirty and I told you that. But I knew what it was, because I deal with it every day, and I deal with taxes every day. But yeah, that's it, that's what it is. We are in a tough time right now. People are Some people are experiencing problems and whatnot, and inflation is high, but our budget and our funds here at the township, our stuff is in pretty good shape. We've been pretty conservative, and I think that that's gonna help our people out, especially with the police and fire village redoing it instead of having asking them more. I think it's gonna help them out for another year to get their feet under them. Hopefully maybe by 2024 or so, maybe things will change a little bit, who knows? I have to forecast, and that's what it is. I'm very fortunate as a township treasurer to have a good working relationship with our county and our county treasurer. Jason asked about the fiduciary responsibilities and monies and everything. The county treasurer's office does a banking, statewide banking report with all the banks there is in Michigan. It's done quarterly. I've been very fortunate in all the years I've been a treasurer before and now with the township currently. She shared that report with me, and I'm able to look at these banks and look at financial institutions, and they're graded from A right on down to D, I believe it is, as far as what their rating is, and I'm able to look at that. She shares that report with me, and I'm able to see what banks are good risk and what banks are not good risk. And, these are all just parts of the job.
Well, thanks for your hard work on this. Being one of 3 that didn't have any findings is something to hang your hat on.
This is 5. Actually, I've been back for 5, and this is 5.
Yeah.
And then this is 5. It's not, we're not counting, but,
Yes, we are.
Yes,
I'm a numbers guy, so I know the number. But it's the staff, and people listen to me, people are easy to work with, and our accounting staff is wonderful, our audit staff, we've had 2 different auditors since I've been back here, we ran the gamut, and we're still getting good marks, we're doing good things here.
Any other questions? All right, we're good. Then our next is going to be B, which is the Board of Trustees special meeting.
Thanks, Josh. Thank you, Marie. I am asking that, I know earlier this year we canceled 2 meetings, July 5th and August 1st, and at this time I'm requesting 2 special meetings be called. As we edge closer to budget season, I would like to discuss the budget prior to beginning that with you. There's several employment issues. Our police chief's retiring at the end of the year, and I would like to discuss his contract with you, or excuse me, a replacement with you. We have the Park Lake property environmental assessment back. I need to discuss that with you. My review and my contract are coming up. And while I've been trying to balance how much is put on each agenda so that we can make it through each meeting, it's getting harder and harder to do that as if we only have 1 meeting. And things are carrying from meeting to meeting. So I would really, it would be helpful, I think, for all of us if we could meet special, if that works for any of you, 1 or 2 times.
I have a question. Anybody else have a question? All right, my question is, with calling the request for the special board, I'm understanding, so help me out here if I'm not, because you guys have been here probably for longer than me, that it's supposed to be either the supervisor or 2 trustees that call for special meetings. So I'm not understanding.
Or by the board at a meeting.
Yeah, that's what I'm.
So if I bring it to you and there's a motion and a second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're paying for him to be here.
There you go, you got dollar signs crushed for it.
I just wanted to comment on this because I've had this come up with a couple of recent clients.
I thought,
Importantly, sort of outside of a meeting, obviously you're noting the fact that the supervisor and 2 other trustees.
or 2 other.
Correct. There's another provision actually in the Charter Township Act that does permit the board to essentially compel attendance of all of the board at a special meeting. So certainly I think procedurally if the superintendent raises and the votes on it with a majority approval, then you can set those special meeting dates.
Can you talk a little bit more about compelling?
I was going to say, that's, thank you.
So essentially, there's a couple things that goes down that direction. So if you decide to vote, the board together reaches a consensus to hold the special meetings, then certainly compelling wouldn't really be an issue because you've all voluntarily consented to be present. But certainly there are situations where we run into the issue where officials are not able to attend continuous meetings. And you start to get into the issue of deciding whether you think that that's misfeasance, nonfeasance, or malfeasance of office. And so both the revised statutes of 1846 as well as the Charter Township Act provide you the ability to actually take a vote and compel the attendance to try to sort of verify whether or not fiduciary duties are being met. That's not what I'm trying to raise, so maybe the misuse of my terminology and suggesting that. The general gist of what I want you to know is that the board can vote by a majority and certainly can sort of set special meetings. But I think the supervisor's on point. There is language in the Charter Township Act that procedurally provides the ability for the supervisor to also request outside of an open meeting the ability to attempt to, that would be call a special meeting, and then certainly the issue there would be assembling a quorum, which would be true of you guys as well, deciding what dates you want to hold it.
So,
No.
the reason this, among the laundry list of things I've been accused of, one of them is failure to show up to a meeting that was called. So I'm curious as to how this all plays out in terms of if the supervisor were to call a meeting for a couple of days after, in 2 days, and then if I already have an obligation, she can still compel me to show up?
Oh, I don't
No, so
think
actually, interestingly enough, the section related to the supervisor doesn't contain the same term compel, as does a majority vote of the board under a different section of the Charter Township Act. I think typically how this works out, practically speaking, and under the act, is supervisor would decide that they're gonna call a special meeting. There is a notice obligation. I think they've gotta provide actually more notice than what's required under the Open Meetings Act to the board itself to meet. And then, of course, if you're gonna call a meeting, you wanna be able to take action. You can't take action without a quorum. So if you don't show up and you end up losing the quorum, then the board meets and you're pretty much all gonna go home because you don't have a sufficient quorum to take action. If you are that individual who sort of lacks the quorum, if there's a sufficient quorum, the board can move on and you're not present.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, don't sit down.
Okay.
When you stand there, you're there forever. What has all of that got to do with calling a special meeting? I'm still not clear on that, because if two board members decide they want a special meeting, that's certainly a legitimate thing to do. Does staff then, even with township charter, have the right to call a special meeting just because we're all sitting here to vote?
Well, I think logistically, having been present, I think what I would say is, as I understand the point, she's raising the action item that she would like the board to take that action item up.
No, I get that.
Okay, so I wouldn't suggest that's calling a special meeting.
Oh,
Calling a special
wouldn't.
meeting, the act
Okay.
itself provides the authority to basically set the meeting with sufficient 24 hours notice, and then otherwise you have to have a quorum to be present to actually get any action done.
Okay.
This is different. She's basically placed it as an action item for the board to consider. It's within the province of the board. You get to decide, are you going to hold these special meetings or not? Certainly the superintendent is not calling the special meeting. She's asking for you to decide if
Okay,
you want to vote
that's
on
how
that
you
matter.
okay.
I'm making you aware that there's business to be taken care of, and it can't be accomplished in one meeting a month and then one meeting in August.
Correct. But that, again, that goes back to two of the board members making a determination to call a special meeting.
It's separate.
And what you're saying, and if I'm understanding what you're saying, is that the superintendent is not calling, she's asking the board to determine. So the two members that you normally, the two members that are requested to call a special meeting, they're not, in other words, we don't have two members that are calling.
Yeah, let me back up one extra
Okay.
point. So the interesting thing about the statute actually provides separate actions and powers to be taken under different provisions.
Correct.
Oftentimes, a statute permits some official to take an action and would otherwise also allow the board to take some action. So what I typically would use is the term mutually exclusive. Those powers are not mutually exclusive to two board members or otherwise the board acting as a whole. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
So the board can otherwise do the same power essentially when they're in a public meeting together as can the supervisor or the two board members. And the reason for that is really, it's a legal one. You can't assemble the board outside of an open meeting to decide to call a special meeting without violating the Open Meetings Act. That's why the Charter Township Act specifically is identifying less than a quorum, right? That's why they're saying two board members can call a special meeting with a request to the clerk, 24 hours notice. Or if you assemble the board in a public meeting, they can certainly add a special meeting to their list.
Okay.
Have you got some dates figured out for this?
I had indicated July 25th at 6 PM and Monday, August 29th at 6 PM.
July what?
We should get right here.
Yeah, I
July
July
25th.
25th
And August
and
29th.
August 29th.
Those are.
Those are in between regular meetings in July, August, and September.
And the 25th is on what day?
They're both.
Both Monday?
They're non-meeting Mondays.
Yes.
Yeah,
July 25th
I
would be
gotcha.
next Monday.
that's between our board meetings.
Does anybody have any conflicts?
I'm looking.
August 29th, conflict, but that's enough time.
I won't know till the day of the 25th.
The 25th is one of the days.
29th. of
August 29th.
I think that works for me.
I'm not sure I'll be live on the 29th of August. I hate to make
That's my
a...
line. That's,
Well, he just said, he looked at me right in the eye when he said 1846. And
I don't think Mr. Patterson thinks you were alive in 1846.
So are you guys looking for a motion here?
interesting
All right, so-
interpretation.
I move to approve two special meetings, one of the Board of Trustees, the first for July 25th, starting at 6 PM, and the second at August 29th at 6 PM as well.
And the
Support.
second one, I'll have a discussion then. My question would be with this group, what time are you looking at 6 till whatever?
Probably 11.
I got it, and it works for me. Does that
getting
work for
cold.
you?
Works for me.
All right, 6 to 11.
Now, don't we have a board rules where we can't go over a certain amount of time?
9 o'clock.
Not for a special election, though. I don't want a special meeting, special.
Well, I think
election.
any meeting.
I'm worse than you are.
That'd be any
So
meeting.
let me clarify my, if you'd be willing to let me change, amend mine. All the same thing, but from 6 to 9 PM.
Okay.
I'll second that.
I already seconded that, Joe.
Well,
We
just
didn't
trying
have a
to
time.
move
I wa-
the meeting along.
I know.
We didn't have time.
Dates and times.
Yep, that's exactly, all right, 69.
I got a question. Where's my bell?
Oh,
I don't
I'm
wanna-
sorry.
wanna bring it in.
Absolutely. Why don't you bring mine?
Well, I've asked for one, but they never give me one. Bell.
Very helpful.
Is this just general business meeting, or is this our budget meeting too?
No, budget meetings won't start until I will present your budget to you on September 1st for your meeting on September 6th.
Okay,
So prior to the budget.
all right.
Oh, you said budget. I'm sorry. Did I misunderstand?
Well, the budget planning is one of the topics.
Oh, budget planning.
Yeah, what you find important to fund in 2023, discussions like that, but not
The numbers.
not the numbers on paper. Just
So like a
priorities.
strategic
Yes.
plan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. That's, I was looking for one word that would. Not interesting. Okay, nope. We have,
Mr.
a motion.
Ginsburg?
Yes.
Mr. Rosecrans?
I'll try.
Ms.
guess
Butler
that's a
Challenger,
yes.
yes? Ms. Howe?
I'll say yes, but one missing doesn't make a difference, so, yeah.
Mr. Wisswasser?
Yes.
Mr. Benzi?
Yes.
Mr. Almarigi?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're on item C, which is the second reading and adoption. You're hiding back there.
So, this is the ordinance that was introduced at the last meeting. Basically, what this is attempting to amend is the language around only one principal building per parcel. This has been not how the ordinance has been implemented for the last 10 or 15 years, as far as I can tell. It's only been applied to residential properties. We just changed the language to match how this ordinance has been implemented.
Okay. Desmond, you think one at a time?
So I do have a question. So I went back to the current ordinance. So am I correct to assume that the language that you're looking to change is just section 15.02, which says one building per lot, and then there's the example? What I'm trying to figure out is the current language says no more than one principal building may be permitted on a lot or parcel unless specifically provided for elsewhere in this ordinance. I'm confused as exactly what is the change that we're making.
So we're making that language only apply to residential properties.
Okay, so that it's the non-commercial residential land uses. Okay.
Problematic language for a number of reasons, how it's currently written.
Okay, then does this need to take a vote?
I'll move the second reading and adoption of ordinance number 31.78 as presented.
Second.
Mr. Rosecrans?
Yes.
Ms. Butler Challenger, yes. Mr. Howe? Ms. Howe?
No.
Mr. Wisswasser?
Yes.
Mr. Benzi?
Yes.
Mr. Almarigi?
Yes.
Mr. Jones-West?
Yes.
All right. You sat down. You've got to be up to it. You've got a whole list of stuff here.
I think I could, Chris, did you want to introduce?
I think depending on what questions the board has, it could be the planner or Mr. Patterson or Mr. Reed. I'm so sorry, Mr. Fox. There's two Jacobs there.
Roll through
I work with
stand
both
and
of
just
them.
point.
I'm flattered to be Mr.
I'm so
All
sorry.
right. This one is for the introduction and first reading of ordinance 68.2. Amending the Michigan medical marijuana facility licensing ordinance.
Would you like to introduce
So-
it, Miles or Chris?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. I will say for this, I'll note that there is obviously an interplay between the three, so I'm gonna stick to obviously the medical marijuana licensing one, but you're gonna see that when we get to the end of this subsection F is actually the development district. When the supervisor calls it action items, it'll come full circle. So, just looking with respect to the medical marijuana facilities license, what I want to underpin with respect to the clean copy is a few of the changes. They're actually not as significant as you may think. The general idea in going through them is that we've been working with staff with respect to quite a few pending marijuana cases that currently actually are still in the Court of Appeals. There was one decided last Thursday, although one of the really interesting issues that we would like to see decided, the panel didn't directly address that. So I just checked this morning, and there's about 7 or 8 other cases with that issue presented that have been fully briefed, but it's not fully decided yet. So I think we'll get a decision quite soon. The Mount Pleasant case, though, actually was decided in their favor. It's actually really strong for municipalities who are going through this process, so that was helpful. So with respect to the MMFLA ordinance itself, we went through and cleaned up some language. So one of the general items that actually was modified throughout the ordinance when referencing the application as to whether or not it was an initial application or not, that actually becomes important because any individual who presumably files an initial application will subsequently seek a renewal. And if they do seek a renewal, we want to ensure there's a difference between the initial application and a subsequent renewal. A renewal applicant can rely on materials previously submitted to the township, so they're not submitting another 300 or 200 pages. And then in addition to that, there's another action item that refers to an application, which is sort of a transfer application. And so to the extent that we make a distinction between renewals, transfers, and initial applications, those edits are made throughout the ordinance language. And they're pretty minor. There's references where the word initial was added, etc. The other actually substantial item that was changed relates to an appeal process that was added. There was a case that was decided last fall involving the village of Edwardsburg. It created an interesting jurisdictional issue regarding administrative appeals and sort of dealing with somebody who challenges a decision of this board after it goes through a licensing issuance decision. So we specifically, in sort of looking at that decision, decided the best plan of action was to go back to your ordinance. Currently, the position that we were taking with the one that you had adopted is if you issued a license under that and there was a issue with the board's decision, you would go to circuit court. And again, this case last fall sort of challenged that premise. And so we went back in and added an administrative step first, where it's very clear that we're attempting to create a licensing process akin to other zoning appeals, other sort of licensing decisions that have an internal appeal first and then would be in an administrative appeal process in the circuit court after handled internally. We have, also I should note, in both of these subsections, D through sub F, these have been discussed with the Planning Commission actually twice. We'll sort of again get full circle at subsection F. But with respect to this appeal process, we did vet that language through them. It is designed to sort of be broad, but provide a procedural step that if somebody seeks an appeal, it can be handled. Ultimately, the important part about both of these ordinances, and I know it was discussed previously, is that the Township Board retains all power and authority to decide decisions. So the appeal process actually creates an administrative hearing, so there can be a record developed if there is a challenge to the board's first decision, but ultimately it's a recommendation back to the board. The board is the body vested with final authority to decide if you were to reconsider your decision or continue with the decision that you had previously. And for many people, I guess in appeals, that might seem a little awkward that you would go back to the same body for which you're appealing. It is used in other state agencies where they make an initial determination. We do some fact finding. If there is a challenge, we bring back that record before that same body and then have an approval. So it is akin to some of the other agencies at the state level who process licensing and permits. And then the other item that saw substantial changes is when you get to Section 6. Section 6 contains all of your operational requirements in the police power ordinance. And it includes items as far as what licenses are required, security requirements, documentation, etc. All of that remains the same as it was previously adopted by this body. The items that were actually reviewed is the spacing requirements. So the spacing distances were based off of measurements, for instance, from obviously the interstate entrance and off ramps and some other sort of moving targets. And so in working with staff, it was decided that really probably the clearest way to tell an applicant if they're within sort of that spacing to be able to apply for a license is if we create a demarked boundary. So instead of measuring 1,000 feet from a specific object or piece of infrastructure, as was in the current draft that you have, we sort of removed that thought and augmented it with the zoning ordinance that I'll get to by demarking the boundaries where some of these items can be applied for. The other separation distances that did exist and still remain, there is a separation distance between establishments. And early on, that was the township's concerns related to sort of getting a core amount of concentration. And so it's a separation distance among those establishments in a specific location. You wouldn't end up with sort of a cluster of those based on maintaining that separation distance. The separation distance, again, which we'll get to when you look at the size of the boundaries, it was 1,000 feet in the original draft. It's been reduced to 500 because of the overlay district and the size of those boundaries within that district. That essentially takes care of the substantial edits that were done or insubstantial edits that were done to the medical ordinance.
2 questions. Anybody else have questions before I? Okay. One is, if I'm understanding what Miles had said, there's not a cost to renew, or there is a cost to renew? Okay. What's the cost to renew?
$5,000 per
Okay.
license.
So in order to renew a license, or to have a license, it's 5,000. To renew it, it's an additional 5,000.
Yeah.
Okay, yes. And the other thing is, could you expound a little bit more on the internal appeal? How does that, if someone is appealing a decision, how do they do that?
So we did set forth enough detail in section 6.
Yeah, I
And we
read.
can look at that, where essentially we provided a specific time period after the township board makes its decision. They have 10 days, at which time they have to file a written appeal. It's got to be submitted to the township, and it has to state the grounds upon which they think the township board basically committed error in its decision.
And
It's
then what
pretty-
happens?
What's that?
And then what happens?
After the receipt of the appeal, the township board would essentially schedule, well, the township would essentially schedule a hearing. That's where you have this sort of third-party hearing officer who's gonna hear whatever written appeal and grounds have been raised. The record would then be built before that hearing officer with ultimately, again, a written recommendation for a proposal, as in like a proposed decision saying, yes, board, I don't think you committed these errors, or board, I think you should maybe reconsider whatever, this factor with respect to this application. Remember that in the medical marijuana situation, there's no competitive review, so we're not talking about scoring appeals. So we'd probably be looking at maybe procedural issues or items that the individual thought had been completed in their application, and to the extent that the board maybe relied on those and denied it. So I think, you know, the hearing officer's goals with respect to medical are probably a little bit more easy because you're not weighing and balancing potential competing interests in other applicants.
So that hearing officer would be housed here in the township?
Well, it would be an individual that if you had an appeal filed, that you would essentially contract with to handle that appeal.
Who would normally do that?
Well, municipalities have used all sorts of individuals.
That's what I,
They have hired other attorneys, they have hired individuals with expertise in the area. They have looked to other local governmental units who are in the area to look to their staff to come and sit as that individual. And then a lot of local units, especially with respect to townships, will look to counties to see if there are individuals at the county level who would have the capacity to be able to contract and provide that service.
is that something that we should be contracting, if we pass this, should they be looking now at contracting with a hearings officer?
Well, I think you certainly could, to be prepared to the extent that there is an appeal. Under the medical marijuana situation, of course, you know, you have a first come, first served basis with respect to applications. You would already sort of know what applications that you have. And so I potentially suspect that that's a non-issue, that these changes aren't going to impact any pending applications to my knowledge. And these changes won't really actually impact any licensees who have received any approvals under the ordinance.
So it should be somebody as an alternate, so to speak, in other words, on standby. Is that only because we're assuming that an appeal won't take place because everything's pretty much?
Well, I think certainly what I would suggest is that there's nothing wrong with when we get the ordinances amended for the township to make it a part of its prerogative to decide how and who it would engage.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate that. Yes, thank you.
Under required spacing 5A, I just want to make sure I understand this. So it says any distance is measured horizontally between the nearest property line of the parcel where the marijuana facility is located. So am I reading that correctly? That's if a facility is, say, on the westernmost border of the parcel, the line that would start at the westernmost property line?
Yes.
Okay. And then that would be measured from that property line to the nearest property line of the next facility?
west.
Yes.
Even if, and so what if scenario where you have large parcels, a facility is placed at 50.5% of the property to the west, but that's nearest property line is, say, 300 yards away.
Yep.
That's still the starting place.
Yes.
And then the second facility did the same, but in the opposite direction. You conceivably could have two facilities right next to each other. No, I guess that would
No.
be that next property.
No, because you're gonna get two property lines that are on each other for that to work,
Got
so.
it. All right, I was trying to figure out
Yeah.
what might be the,
Yeah,
worst
you
case
can-
scenario for
Right,
us.
right, the worst case scenario is probably exactly 500 feet plus setbacks on either side of that property line.
West of that property line.
Well, so, well, wait a second. So say if the parcel is, that property line is 500 feet from the actual establishment, right? But it's still the closest property line.
Yeah, then you'd actually be getting
You
an
could have
additional.
two facilities on adjacent parcels due to some sort of weirdness of the particular parcel.
We'd have to draw it out. I would find that hard to believe that that because you're looking at adjacent property lines closest to each other.
But that's not what I'm reading. What I'm reading is that, say you had a really long parcel.
Yep.
And the facility was, let's say it was 1,000-foot parcel, 2,000 feet, and it's 1,001 feet. Or it's directly in the middle, except it's 1 foot over, right? Then that property, the closest property line could be the very furthest part out, right? And then, which may be in excess of 500 feet to the nearest property line on the adjacent parcel to the opposite side.
Yeah, sure. I definitely agree with that.
You need to like draw it out,
Yeah, right.
right?
I
So-
definitely agree in the part that you can certainly create an excess of 500 on two parcels where the property lines may only be 500 feet apart because of the location of the establishment. But I'm not sure I'm following on the analysis that you could end up with two property lines adjacent to that would otherwise be 500 feet apart, but end up with establishments that are closer than 500 feet. That part I'm not following.
Well, I'm not sure I'm following it either. I'm just trying to work through
Okay.
what might be weird.
I think you guys are both saying things that are correct, but,
Sorry.
no, you're good.
Gotta use the microphone.
But, let me try to explain it this way. So this, as somebody that's gone on GS and had to measure out a lot of these scenarios that we've been running into, I've measured them. So, we wanted to introduce this language of where a use is principally located because there are a lot of properties in that township that either a sensitive use, could have been measured or the, marijuana use could have been measured from, where they could have bought a facility that was already developed. Spags would be a good example. That is a proper facility that is located across two parcels. So there's a parcel line that actually cuts Spags. 3/4 of Spags is on one parcel and 25% is on the other parcel. So for measuring purposes, let's say Spags is the facility, we would measure from the property line where Spags is most principally located, that parcel kind of closest to Clark Park Road. And if we were measuring this way, we would measure 500 feet this way. But we would measure from the nearest property line to the nearest property line. So it would be 500 feet from that parcel line where Spags is principally located, and let's say the township, we're also across several different parcels. We would be to the nearest property line of the cemetery. Because
I understood. What I was not taking into consideration is that for the second facility, we would still have the same obligations, and so there would be.
You get at least
no
the first-
scenario where there'd be closer to 500 feet.
Yeah, and just, there could be, and because we tried to run all of these wild one-off scenarios that are very unlikely to happen, but could potentially happen, and they could potentially locate a building that's already established, not been cleaned up through boundary adjustments over the years.
Thank you.
I have another question, just, I think I understand this, so under required space in C, no commercial medical facility or marijuana establishments. Now, the intent there is any marijuana establishment, adult use or medical.
Yeah, it's just a
and could be
different,
or grow facility or, okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right. We have a motion?
I have a question.
What?
All of this says first reading. Do we vote on things in the first reading?
Yes.
Or do we
Yes.
Have a
Yes,
first
we
read?
do.
We do. Okay.
And then you'll have a second. So, this is the first introduction, first reading. We've already done. Yes, isn't that correct, Carrie?
No, this is the first time.
This is the first,
You,
only because of the new language?
yes.
Okay.
So I'll move approval and introduction of in the first reading of ordinance number 68.2 as presented.
I'll second
I got a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, discussion.
That's okay.
Yes, trustee.
The marijuana retail establishments, we're still just one.
Yes. That's good, that's actually in the next ordinance, so.
Yeah.
We're discussing.
How did I miss one?
There's 3 in there.
Yeah, okay, but you're discussing now the medical marijuana.
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah, subsection
okay.
D.
Yeah.
But you're voting on D, correct?
Yeah, 68.2.
The, since it's just an amendment, the reason that the medical marijuana amendment that you have in front of you does not have the permit numbers listed is because they are not being changed.
Okay, I got you.
So they are as previously adopted.
We have a motion and a second.
Mr. Benzi?
Yes.
Mr. Almarigi?
Yes.
Mr. Funes Bliss?
Yes.
Mr. Rosecrans?
Yes.
Ms. Butler Challenger, yes. Ms. Howe?
Yes.
Mr. Wisswasser?
Yes.
Thank you for not sitting down. That's appreciated. All right, we have E, which is the introduction, first reading of 68 tree. And this one, summary of the publication. So, shoot.
So board members, it's just with respect to the adult use, I think what I will say is everything that we discussed in subsection D is consistently carried over into subsection E. So that would include for this adult use, referring to the appeal process that we discussed, as well as making those adjustments to the required spacing. That language is matches and is consistent for both uses. The changes that were otherwise made to the adult use ordinance relate to looking at, one, we did go in and make sure that there was consistency. If you look, and it goes to one of the board members' questions in section 2 about the uses that are permitted, marijuana micro businesses, secure transporter, safety compliance facilities. We did want to make sure that those were permitted. I believe that it was micro businesses or secure transporters that were left off, and you'll see that that language was also added to the zoning ordinance. With respect to referring to also number 3, there was a reference at the bottom of page 2, it doesn't have a page number, those uses that are prohibited. So those uses that are prohibited also included a license that should have not been listed there, so that was actually revised and added back into paragraph 2. Other than that, again, we go over the, this is a little bit different with respect to getting in section 4, the application process. Since this is a MRMA, and we have adult use, we're required by statute to consider the circumstances in which competitive review would be required. So you already looked at sort of the competitive review factors and opening that application window previously this evening. What this sort of does is basically it adds a section
in section 4, sub 2, sub B and E, that essentially addresses those procedures and standards being determined and the ability to grant conditional approval or deny an application, and then stating the reasons for it. So we're trying to back up that appeal process that we're creating as far as making sure that it's in writing. And then in subsection E, since we've created an appeal process, we included language in there related to the fact that competitive review appeals have the potential to then stop licenses from being further processed. There's an opportunity for like a stopgap to essentially override that, but the concern just being that, for instance, if you've got an appeal that exists for one permit and you proceed forward to process the individual who was awarded that permit and someone is successful on an appeal, you potentially run into a situation where you're dealing with how to handle that. We've had it happen in a couple of municipalities, and in those instances where, and actually none of them have been fully litigated, but ultimately the licensees have been interested in working out an issue with the townships, they end up basically under a consent judgment authorizing permits that are in excess of the ordinance. And it's because there's not potentially an easy solution to stop the processing of other applicants. If you don't have language like that, of course, the person who's awarded the applicant has a right to proceed. They want to proceed because they don't want to be removed that right if there's an appeal. So it allows the opportunity to deal with those situations if there were a challenge. And that is, again, because this ordinance has competitive review, plus we added that appeal process that is in section 9 of this ordinance. The appeal process itself completely mirrors what we already discussed with respect to the timing, filing a written decision with the heirs of the township board, it being heard before a hearing officer with a proposal for a recommendation coming back before the township board. The idea there that the courts will hopefully construe that as being then an administrative appeal to the courts. The last then thing is edits again to the required spacing section. You'll see that again required spacing is limited to subsections A through C. That's been really simplified from the next sort of zoning ordinance that we're going to discuss. And that is the bulk of those edits. It's really consistent with what you've already seen in the prior ordinance.
Any questions? Need a motion?
I'll move introduction and first reading of ordinance number 68.3, amendments as presented.
Second.
Mr. Almarigi?
Yes.
Mr. Diaz-Bliss?
Yes.
Mr. Rosecrans?
No.
Ms. Butler Challenger, yes. Ms. Howe?
Yes.
Mr. Wisswasser?
Yes.
Mr. Benzi?
Yes.
Thank you.
We'll move on to F, which is introduction and first reading of 31.77. This has been established in commercial sales. Or did you give them to me?
Pass out to you guys.
So I'll just do a general explanation of this, and then that way, if you look at those maps, I think Miles, it probably makes the most sense for you to explain the maps
Okay.
first, then I can talk about the substance. The general idea with respect to the overlay is creating a location within your zoning ordinance map that allows for a definite demarcation. If you look at page 3 of that draft, and also if you look at the maps now that Miles is circulating, you will see that it's very easy to identify the exact location of both what's been identified as the Bath Township location, the Saginaw corridor, and the Drumheller corridor. And I think with respect to sort of the location, Miles, I think I'll defer to you. One of the maps that he's providing to you measures separation distances that came from the original set of ordinances that had the required spacing. So you'll notice that the required spacing used to have about 8 subsections, because we were measuring from other potential sensitive uses, we were measuring from their own establishments, and so I'll let Miles explain. That pretty much is how we ended up deriving the boundary that you're seeing in the proposed ordinance.
Yeah, so it's important to note here, probably the most important, that although the regulatory function here is changing from a regulatory ordinance into more of a zoning ordinance, that that mechanism is changing, but the actual where these land uses are permitted and where they're not permitted is not changing at all. So, that's important and to operate it that way for several reasons, but essentially you can see in map 1 here with the opaque green buffers, that is the language of using the ordinance that was passed in 2018, basically saying where these uses can go. So you can see like over Webster Road, for example, there's kind of cut out a little divot there. That's because there was one of the many requirements and required spacing was that this use is now permitted within 1,000 feet of Webster Road, between the I-69 ramp and I believe it was Clark Road. And so basically to get to this map, which is the map that indicates where the overlay district is in existence, we said, okay, wherever green touches blue and is not touched by red, those are the parcels that were in play in 2018, and those are the same parcels that will be in play today in 2022. Now, wherever parcels were not, wherever the blue parcels or any other zoning district that was not in play in 2018 remains not in play for these land uses now in 2022.
Have there been instances where MDOT has applied for medical facilities on their property?
No, if I remember correctly, actually, at least in the MFL for sure, it excludes municipalities and governmental entities from being participated. I don't know if that carries over into Merton or not.
So I asked a ridiculous question, but I do wonder why we have M3 MDOT parcels as identified in the overlay district. Because those aren't zoned high density development.
They're in our assessing software, and this could be an error of our assessing software, something we need to clean up. They actually are zoned development, even though they're owned by MDOT.
And that's actually not atypical. Typically, the state, so long as they're operating a governmental state function, would not be subject to zoning. But of course, if they were to operate a sort of situation outside of that, they would be subject to that district. And I think actually something similar has even arisen with the capital area Lansing Airport. So it would be odd to sort of zone those properties to the extent that there were uses, for instance, leases and other things conducted to ensure that those operations are consistent with zoning.
Mr. Patterson, I just want to say that for every ridiculous question I ask, you come up with a really strong set of explanations as to why it might not be a stupid question. So
yeah, no, it's a good one. I won't bore you with all the case law, but it's been around for a while, so. Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to explain this. So, I mean, the general gist of it is actually, I think, pretty simple, but of course, in sort of putting it in your zoning ordinance, unfortunately, and getting in all the sections, it makes this a little bit longer substantially than it needs to. The bottom line of what you're creating is you're essentially doing what we call a zoning ordinance map amendment. So lots of times in the zoning ordinance, we really get in and we amend the text, right? And we change words or we add uses, which we have done in here as well. But one of the main items that's attempted to be accomplished here is to create this new district, no different than really the development district that we're putting, like in instance where we're putting part of this over, what's now called an overlay, and so the two districts will exist over top of each other. You have other overlay zoning districts, I won't bore you with the mechanics of that. It's not nothing new to the township. Now, with respect to the zoning amendment itself, you'll only see like sort of particular uses listed, and that's because when you get to the first page, you look at section 2, those are uses that we have identified as removing, and then in section 3, you'll see uses that we have identified as adding. The actual complete list of uses that are permitted in that district are going to be found in your code. And then, of course, if you go to your website, there's even a section that has those sections that have been recently adopted that are not yet codified. That'll tell you what medical marijuana and adult use items are already permitted in your zoning ordinance. So, for instance, in the development district, which is your 6.04, your special land uses, you already have grower, processor, safety compliance facility, retailer, and then micro business. So if you look at this list, this is why we're removing retailer, micro business, and provisioning center out of the D district itself, because we're shuffling those uses into now this overlay. So they won't be allowed in the broader. Is the whole district? Yeah. So
you look at your development district, the light blue color, you look through here, they won't be permitted throughout this entire district. Of course, they weren't before anyways, right? Because you had separation distances in your other ordinance. But in deleting those, if we wouldn't have made any changes to the zoning ordinance, they would have been permissible throughout that entire D district. So they're removed out of that D district, and then of course they are put inside of the actual overlays that are created. So you'll see them being removed in section 2 of the proposal, and then when you get to section 4, you'll actually see the creation of that overlay, and then you'll see them relisted when you get to section 6B.04. And that's just sort of numbering based on your ordinance. You already have 6, I think you already have 6A, which is an overlay, 6B goes after that. The other sort of area then that you have, and then we end up obviously adding marijuana secure transporters. Again, they were not in there before, and if I remember correctly at the planning commission, and I'll defer, I think we weren't clear if we remembered why they were left off, but thought that if we were gonna go through this amendment process, it would make sense that we at least address them and put them in a position of being able to be authorized. So that's certainly legally they're consistent with how you're treating your other special land uses. It's a policy decision as to the addition of that use. And then I think I just want to go to page 4. The one thing that is significantly different about this proposal than what hasn't sort of existed currently in those that we have on our website is really 6B05. 6B04 controls the overlay, and it's essentially your retail. Those items that can sell marijuana are limited to this overlay. If you're outside the overlay and you're conducting another use that's authorized in the township, then you would look at the list and it could be operated within the entire development district. If you look at 6B05, there's actually a list of site development standards. Previously, we did not have site development standards in your zoning ordinance amendment for your marijuana uses. But the reason that they have been added is to allow a licensee sort of a better idea of exactly how the ordinances work together. And so instead of looking at just if you're looking at zoning and they're attempting to figure out how to comply with zoning, all they would do is go to the zoning ordinance and they'd see the general standards that apply to a special land use, and then they would see that they're allowed in the district, not thinking through what other requirements might exist. Well, that's because, unfortunately, marijuana licensing is complicated, and there's 2 other ordinances that they would have to know that are outside the zoning ordinance that provide all of those operational requirements. So in this amendment, to sort of streamline that, make it easier for staff, make it easier for future generations, make it easier for applicants, those site standards have been duplicated essentially from your police power ordinance and placed in as site development standards within your zoning ordinance. And that is true. We went through and double checked them for consistency. That's true of the separation distances. You'll see again, there's only 3 sub-paragraphs there. It completely matches what we have in the police power ordinances. The same is true with respect to co-location, stacking, and the other requirements. So it essentially, none of the language has changed. The requirements still existed in the township. It was just the idea of creating a duplicate of those in the zoning ordinance so that individuals who were looking at one ordinance, because there's no reference potentially in the one. The only thing in the zoning ordinance that obviously would be a reference is when you file the application, there's a subsection that says you would have to indicate that you've received conditional approval for a license. So eventually, if you're filling out the application, they're going to figure it out, and then they're going to go find that ordinance, or they're going to ask Miles or Karen for it. But the way that this is set up is it's a little bit more self-contained. You're going to get an idea of what these site development standards are when you look at the zoning ordinance amendment.
Yeah, just real quick too, and that's an important tool for what, as Chris correctly said, this makes things easier for in the future as well, because being a planner, it's not very typical for us to go into a police power ordinance or a regulatory ordinance and figure out, okay, security cameras and fencing is required. A planner, that hasn't spent as much time as I have talking to Chris, when think about those things and go into the regulatory ordinance, they would just say, okay, this is everything in the zoning code, they've met all these factors, this development's good to go. But known to them, there are all these other sets of requirements. So, 10, 20 years down the road, that could become an issue for the planner trying to administrate this down the road. So it's good to, as Chris correctly said, self-contain this ordinance a little bit more, keep everything in-house in one spot. So it's nice for, as you said, the developers as well that are trying to figure out how to comply. They want to comply with the rules, but the rules are across several ordinances and overcomplicated. It's a difficult one there as well.
Just a quick question. Is this actually 8 PM to 8 AM? So it'll be at,
Non-operating hours, they will not operate between
because
hours.
that says, no provisional center aspect of license shall operate between 8 PM and
Yes.
8 AM. So they close at 8 PM,
Yes,
and then they open again at 8 AM.
yes.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
So one question I have is, the overlay district contains, there will be no marijuana facilities outside of the overlay district. Is that correct to say?
No.
Just provisioning centers are
Correct.
restricted to the overlay? Okay, thank you.
And I think if I remember correctly, it's been some time since we did the original, but your HDD district has provisions as well for safety compliance. I think safety compliance and processor is what you put in your HDD district.
I believe that's correct.
So those would remain, and of course, those uses could exist without your entire HDD, throughout it, not subject to the overlay either. The overlay is only essentially sales.
Thank you.
I got a
So
question.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I was looking at the ordinance that the board previously approved. I'm looking at the required spacing, and I guess I have some concerns. I'm hoping that you can help alleviate those concerns. And so when I look at the required spacing elements of what we previously supported, there was a 2,000-foot buffer between retailers and educational institutions, colleges, schools, daycare facilities. Of course, there was the 1,000-foot setback between establishments. I think those two are the ones that I kind of have, I'm struggling with, because are we setting up a situation where we may allow a school or a provisioning center to be located next to a school in the future?
So, I think generally speaking, that's accurate. I think, as these conversations have played out, the planning commission, there's been a decent amount of back and forth on the point that you're raising right now. I think one of the large benefits with doing an overlay district instead of 20 different required spacing options and no kind of imagery to go along with that. No one really knows what the landscape is at that time, because is a daycare in that spot, is a daycare not? Is that a school defined as we define a school, or is that just some people that are gathering and doing tutoring as a group? So you get into a lot of those nuances, and it makes it hard for the average individual looking to, let's say, place a daycare, for example, to really understand, okay, am I going by this land use or not? It makes it hard for the people that are looking to do these adult land uses to know, okay, I want to go forward with this operation that's going to cost me millions of dollars in investment. But if a daycare was to come in halfway through they're going through that development process, are they now derailed and just out millions of dollars? So one of the main benefits, I think, of an overlay district is it gives every party involved full information, to include the sensitive uses that you're talking about. So if school, daycare, or any other sensitive use was looking to locate now, obviously daycare, schools are permitted. Commercial daycares are largely permitted by a special use permit. An educational institution would be permitted by right. Either way, they have to come to the planning commission. Therefore, they have to have a pre-application meeting with staff prior. And when they would come in for the application, say, oh, you're looking at, this parcel here, are you aware that that's near our overlay district that contains adult uses? If they're not aware at the time, they become aware prior to them putting in an application. The information is out there for the public to understand, it's open, it's transparent, and if they decide that that's a non-issue for them, they'll have full information to make that. If they decide that is an issue, then at that time they can seek out other properties or other locations for the business if it is a conflict with them. So I guess what I'm really trying to say here is the overlay district gives them being the person looking to develop a sense of use, a much more transparent understanding of the landscape of what uses they could be near, which they didn't previously have, therefore mitigating that possible scenario.
So I just say that, I mean, someone who may want to open up a school, whether it's a Bible school or a charter school or something like that, may have different standards from myself or other board members. And so I guess the scenario here is, I am concerned that, there's potential that, say, maybe there's a Bible charter school established right over here on Kessler's property between now and when, say, a marijuana entity or group may want to build adjacent to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so there still could be the potential of a school and a marijuana facility being next to each other.
The only one caveat there is I'm quite certain the statute still maintains a separation distance in the statute of 1,000 feet for educational institutions. What it does not include, I believe, in its list of sensitive uses is daycare. That was actually added originally a few years ago. We sort of took a different twist on that. So if the school were to establish first in time and it were to satisfy the definition under the act, then that would potentially include basically a state law buffer because we're not changing it or diminishing it. Now we're kind of silent on it essentially by going to the overlay. The reverse situation is possible though that you point out, right? The scenario where the old sort of adage that someone comes to the nuisance. It's not completely applicable because obviously properly licensed businesses are not a nuisance, but that idea that that individual voluntarily coming to that location knowing what's in the market, I don't think that's covered by the state law.
The benefit to the overlay district is that if you're looking to open up a charter school, you know that these are the areas in the township where those uses could be possible. That if you want to open it elsewhere away from those uses, now we have this overlay district. It's very clear where you could open it up and know where you would be away from those uses.
Do you trust every charter organization in their decision-making on where to place schools?
My kids go to public school, and I'm really proud of that, so I'll let the charters manage themselves.
Sorry. I'll quickly forget you.
Stand up for something.
My question is, how quick will this come back for the second reading? Will it come back next Monday on the 25th, or is it going to be?
It has to be published, so no, most likely it won't come back next time. It'll come back.
Our next
at your
regular
next
meeting.
regular meeting.
Okay.
Not the special meeting.
That's a good question.
Any other questions? I'm sorry, Al, I keep missing you. It's on my left, and I should be looking there. Any questions?
I'm ready to go home anytime you want.
I figured both of you were going to go home, so, all right. We need a motion, a second, and a vote.
I'll move the introduction and first reading of ordinance number 3177 as presented with amendments.
Thank you, Board. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Mr. Funes-Bliss?
Yes.
Mr. Rosecrans?
Yes.
Ms. Butler Challenger, yes. Ms. Howe?
Yes.
Mr. Wisswasser?
Yes.
Mr. Benzi?
Yes.
Mr. Almarigi?
No.
All right. Now we are at G, which is the recreational advisory minutes, which I have questions. So hopefully they can, I think they'll be answered. The minutes in there, which is May 9th instead of June's. We have May's, not June's, so we still don't know who's the committee chairs, vice chairs, et cetera. So that's, okay. My questions had to do with, as I'm reading through this, it sounded an awful lot like our Park and Rec. So I just need a quick explanation again of what's the difference. And I know that you were in the meeting, Taylor, so I'm kind of looking at you to say.
So when this board created that committee, it was stated that the Recreation Advisory Committee would contain parks, recreation, including the farmer's market under recreation. So in that meeting, parks, recreation, and farmer's market were all discussed, as they have continued to be discussed in the June meeting and the July meeting.
Because the statement by those committee members dealt more with, one needed to catch up with parks, another one was really looking forward to doing it, another one said, hopefully I keep my, I will keep an open mind, not just for farmer's market, but for what's happening. So I'm still struggling with how this recreation deals with parks, or are we parallel with it? I'm sorry, Joe, go ahead.
I've been at every meeting. Okay.
Yeah.
And so the minutes that you're looking at are the early organization and discussion minutes that the folks are having. They have elected a chair now.
Okay.
And they have a secretary. And they're just a group in development, but it's a really, there's a lot of horsepower there. Okay, so the farmers market people do the farmers market part, along with the other 3 board members. And the parks are discussed at every meeting. The staff comes and they have a time to do a presentation at each meeting and ask questions, okay? The board members can ask them questions. And so it's in its early development, but it's running very smooth. Okay.
No, it's still trying to understand how that differs from park and recreation. Is it because of the combination of the farmer's market?
Yes.
Okay. And we don't have a June meeting, so we don't know.
We had a June meeting, but the secretary was out of town at the last meeting.
I can relate to that.
Okay. And I already have the minutes from the last meeting emailed to me.
Okay.
And so they're moving right along.
Okay, no, that was my question, because as I read them, it sounded an awful lot like park and recreation. It didn't sound a lot like there was this, and you're right, with a lot of horsepower, because you have some really good people on that committee. But I did have the question that because I didn't support the fact of dissolving park and rec, because I think that's really an important piece. But if I'm understanding what you say, this recreational advisory is including the parks and the farmers market in their decision-making, even though the comments dealt more with parks than it did with.
The answer to the question is yes.
Okay.
And
No,
almost,
thank you. Cut to the chase. That's
the answer is yes.
okay. That was really my point in pulling it out, was because as I read it, it didn't make a lot of sense to me. It sounded a lot like park and rec. Pardon?
It was also the secretary's first.
Oh, no question, no question. But as the explanations went on and how it was being laid out, there was questions for it. So you answered what I needed to have answered. Thank you.
I'll move approval of the minutes of the Recreation Committee from May 9th, 2022.
I'll second it.
Mr. Funes-Bliss?
Yes.
Mr. Rosecrans?
Yes.
Ms. Butler Challenger, yes. Ms. Howe?
Yes.
Mr. Wisswasser?
Yes.
Mr. Bensy?
Yes.
Mr. Almarigi?
Yes.
I don't know, we threw that wrench into the, okay. We're at 14, correct? New business, introduction and discussion, dealing with a special use permit application. Miles is still here. Sorry, Miles.
No, okay, it's fine, it's fine. Excited to get to this item. I'm sure the applicant will appreciate that as well, that the board was able to take this item on tonight. So the applicant here, his name is Josh Tyler. He'll be at the next regularly scheduled meeting to answer any questions about this development, but I let him know that I would introduce the item to you guys tonight. So he's bringing this item under his LLC. This gentleman's been operating a landscaping and lawn care company in the greater Lansing area for the last 10 plus years. He's owned this property in Bath Township for quite some time now, and he's been leasing property and operating out of a warehouse in Langsburg, I want to say. As everyone's aware, there's been rising costs. Rent is rising, to say the least, and that includes commercial rents. The place that he's operating his business out of has gone up quite a bit, and he's looking to kind of shore up his own destiny here and develop his own warehouse space on the property he owns, so he's a little bit more insulated from the ebbs and flows of the economy. So he's looking to develop, well, first of all, let me say that the land use in question here is a warehouse and industrial land use within the D development district. The current land use of this parcel is a single family home. The single family home that's currently on the parcel will remain on the parcel and will be converted to office space and will be required to meet all the various building codes that come with converting something from a place for dwelling into a place of commercial business. The warehouse that's being proposed is what I would categorize as a medium-sized warehouse. It's a 5-bay warehouse, and it will be made structurally whole of the single-story, single-family residence that's going to be converted to the office space. Just from the agency review perspective with this development, there were not many concerns just because the intensity of land use happening here is quite low in the spectrum of what is considered low commercial uses and high commercial uses. The storage of any type of hazardous chemicals or any type of large manufacturing or even small manufacturing is not taking place. Essentially, this warehouse will be storing equipment to be used for the land and landscaping business. The traffic added to the area, is in the category from the road commission's perspective of almost non-existent, nothing of note. And then, in terms of just another little point about this situation is the D development parcel that this individual owns is off of Peacock Road. It's right off of the stretch of Peacock Road running south of Old M78. So this parcel is about 2 or 3 parcels south of Old M78. So his northernmost property line shares a border with 3 other current industrial uses, one of which is another land and landscaping company. So from my perspective, in terms of land use and where they should locate and sustainable growth, I think this parcel is a good candidate for this land use. Now, the point of note, I guess, is the parcel to the south of this parcel in question is in the low density residential district. So you do have, going south on Peacock Road, a number of residential uses. So whenever 2 different zoning districts touch, there's always a little bit of land use conflict there, regardless of what the land use is. So Bath Township requires buffering to take place. This applicant is well aware that there could be some concerns from residents. So he has opted to double our minimum requirement buffer, and not only doubling the space from the minimum of 30 feet to 60, but he's also going to install a fence on his property facing the residential areas down the property line where the majority of this industrial use would be taking place. So from my perspective, he's gone above and beyond what our minimums are, and I think the neighborhood appreciates that. He also, during the planning commission, let us know that he reached out to all the adjacent property owners that were part of our 300-foot notice. There were some landowners that showed up farther south on Peacock Road that did not get reached out by this gentleman. They were made aware that, you know, there's no requirement for him to reach out. The fact that he reached out to any neighbors and got a letter of support from all those neighbors in writing, you know, we felt once again was a good faith effort and shows that he cares about the community he's trying to locate in. So, and the landowners that came out, I think by the end of the night, it seemed to me like most of the issues they were worried about seemed like they were resolved and mitigated in a way that they were satisfied.
Were there any comments by the planning commission or concerns? Or was this passed?
I mean, just the normal back and forth and part of the process, but, you know, passed unanimously once the process had run its course to recommend it to us.
Yeah, one issue early on that the planning commission brought up and the applicant changed their site plan to address the issue that the planning commission brought in the earlier meeting was, you know, there's gonna be a lot of trailers pulling out at early times in the morning, headlights going into adjacent properties, and he changed his drive from just a single straight entrance and exit drive to more of a U-shaped turnaround drive, giving, you know, the different crews more options to get in and out of the property. That way they don't have to shine a beam in somebody's house of their headlights as they're, you know, moving to and from work in the early morning. So he's quite amenable to making changes to try to mitigate some of those externalities.
Jason, did you have a question? No. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
On your map, I love these maps.
Okay, going back to the marijuana uses.
Yes.
Okay.
But there's this one section of the low density. Is that still within?
Yeah, that's,
Yeah,
that,
that one little piece right there.
yeah, if I could approach.
No, please do. Approach the bench.
You're not in court, Miles.
Yeah, I only want to get, so this is the
Okay.
parcel in question here.
This one. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh,
This-
good man.
this
That's-
one right
yep,
here.
exactly.
And
Okay.
so this is the adjacent zoning district.
Okay, so this is what I'm questioning when you've got, and I understand we're not on that, but
Mhm.
I noticed that being a low density. Is that when it sells? Hopefully.
And just so the group's aware, she's just asking where is this actual
Yeah, that-
location? It's this parcel right here, and
Yeah,
it's
'cause I'm-
a
I know-
development border shared with the low density residential border.
Because I'm looking at the bigger picture than his request, which I understand.
So when his property sells or when the adjacent property sells?
When any of the adjacents in here will sell, but that particular one, that triangle.
Okay. The triangle that's not next to him, you're just talking in general about this triangle?
Yes, in
here?
general, as I'm looking and trying to follow, you know, what it is you're saying.
Yeah.
I'm looking at this yellow piece, which is a low density residential.
So I think so this is a little bit of a higher level point
Okay.
to make, but I think your concern's well taken. I mean, at a fundamental level, the whole point of zoning is to
Yes.
reduce conflict between land uses. And I think that, Bath Township has adequate buffers to do that, so we would
Okay.
hope that with those buffers in place, if any land uses were in conflict, that would reduce the harm created to that property owner.
Nope, that helped. Okay, any other questions? Comments? None, so we need a motion and second.
No discussion.
I'm sorry, this is an introduction. That's me. No, go ahead.
I'm sorry, he handed me maps and I was just saying, this was just for introduction.
Yep. So this will be coming back?
Yes.
Yep.
Does he understand? Because it sounds like he's really doing everything he possibly can.
Yeah, and he'll be here next time answering questions
Okay.
as well.
Cool. Really appreciate it.
All right, thank you guys.
All right. We have B as in boy. Oh, I'm sorry. The Metro Act bilateral permit for installation of the fiber. Okay, that's
So I received this last week. I believe this might be one of my first Metro Act permits that I've received. You'll see from the packet, we did receive the payment, and we received 3 copies of the completed permit application form and the information about the business as well. As indicated, a municipality shall approve or deny access under this section within 45 days from the date a provider files an application, and that's directed from the Metro Act for access to a public right of way. I forwarded this as well to the Clinton County Road Commission. I've not heard back from Mark, but I did that as a courtesy. I don't know if he's already received a copy or if that's something that's a big deal to him for the Clinton County Road Commission, but I did it as a courtesy. So I don't have a lot of knowledge of these.
I have some questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, not so much about this, but I know over the last few weeks, a company had been installing fiber along Drumheller, Webster, Slate, and now Watson. I don't remember seeing a Metro Act permit request for that entity. I also know that ACDNet is laying fiber along Park Lake Road. So the question I have is there something specific about this particular install process that requires a Metro Act permit? Or have we not permitted the work that has been and currently being done?
So I would have to go back and look at records. I don't know how long they have to complete complete the work that's permitted by these applications once we approve them. So it's very possible that prior superintendents have brought to the board ACD.net or I don't know the other Everstream. But I can't answer that for you. It's possible that we have applications in our files that we've permitted.
Not in the last, 6
No,
years,
not,
right?
not.
Um,
I mean, I've been superintendent for almost 3, so not in that time.
I would like, because broadband is a huge issue right now, and also because we had issues with Everstream, the county had to shut them down because they were throwing materials off. So I would like to look into whether or not we should have permitted at least what's currently being done, like I said, ACDNet and then Everstream, and if that should have been permitted by us, what recourse we have.
Okay. So basically what you're saying is they come in and do, but we don't permit them to come in and do.
So I know Everstream pulled a permit from the county, and I'm wondering if what's required is both a county as well as a local municipal permit. Because I do think that there's the legalese in here. There's elements of liability, there's elements of, so I think we need to look into this.
Big time.
If anything, the permits, and a better understanding.
So in relation to this one, would you like a representative to come talk to us, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Can I go still one step further? Your Metro Act permits, do we have something on file? Is that what you're going to check?
I have to go back and look.
Yeah, to see, because if we've got a policy or we've got something written down that we need to have this Metro Act permit in order to
It's a
be
state
in
law.
Bath Township. It is a law to be in Bath Township, even
I'm not-
though we own no roads, they're all county roads. So does the county then permit this to happen in Bath Township? And that's what you're gonna check?
I'm gonna look to see if we have approved permits for ACD and Everstream, is what Jason's asking me to do.
Does it make a difference if it's in the road right away?
Well, see, that's,
I think that's what,
that's
this is.
part
That's
of
what this is
it.
asking
That's
for
what
as
this.
well.
For the road right away?
Yeah.
So did they go to the county before they come to us?
Well, that's a good question.
That's the question.
I think we have an ordinance that speaks to this, if you go
Okay.
back and look.
Oh, thank you.
And we budgeted for this for many,
The
many
local
years. So
community
we get
stabilization
dollars.
fund.
If you look at your budget and you look at your revenue section,
Yes.
you'll see a revenue number there for, I think this year we budgeted $2,800 for it. We bought half of that right now, maybe. It's
So we
not-
give or we receive?
We receive.
Mhm.
It's,
That's what I thought.
I'm not sure, you get the ordinance as to the whys and wheres, whether we get a royalty from that every, time we do that, and numbers back in 2003, where they came out with a state law that said that we signed up for it, and Attorney Robinson was our attorney, so it started, and we signed up for it, so we would receive revenues for
'Cause you can
the
opt
ones
out.
that's within our jurisdiction.
So that is part of the royalty.
They operate within the county easements, they
Yeah,
tear up
they
my
do.
fields, they go through my fields,
I was
and
gonna
they
say,
put
really?
flare down through, they do.
Yeah, they
That's
do.
perfectly
They
legal.
have to.
It's within 66 foot of the road,
Right.
right away, that's how it works. But if you look back, you have to look all the way back to about 2003, maybe 4, then the ordinance will talk about that, and we created that, Nick Robinson created that, and it was for, so we would get paid for some of these that are happening that you don't really know about. That's how, why that number is in your budget, and that's why you budget for it.
And that's what I found, that municipalities may decide to either opt in or opt out of the distribution provisions, so we must have opted in.
They came to us and they asked us if we wanted to, because he did a blanket policy for all the municipalities he represented, and that's why we opted into it back then.
Okay.
I believe it was in that time.
Yeah, so I actually pulled the Metropolitan Act itself.
Good.
I just, because this was new to me. And so there are certainly annual fees that would be paid. And so I want to make sure that's, for those providers, I mean, there's two advantages to ensuring that we're holding providers accountable to this. One is we know who has fiber within our township, where that fiber is. That's one of the things that I think we really, I do not have a good grasp of, is where there's fiber throughout the township. I have an opportunity to talk to them about what their long-term plans are. And then two, having a clear understanding of what our liability is, and then, making sure that we are providing the fees for that and access to the public right.
Okay. Sounds.
So for this, we need to act on this next week.
I received it, I notified Erica that I had received the mailing and that we would be taking it up this meeting and then at our following regular meeting for action, so.
It's not within the 45 days.
I had counted and I thought it was, so.
Mm-mm. Not if you go by the date that's on there.
That's not my, that's not when I received it.
I was gonna say, it's when you receive it, not what the letter's written, right? So when did you receive it?
I'm gonna let you know.
Okay. I figured that's what you were looking up.
So I said to her, I am in receipt of your application materials for Metro Act bilateral permit for installation. I am placing this item on the agenda for introduction and discussion for my board of trustees for Monday, July 18th. Action will be taken on on your application by our next meeting on August 15th, 2022. I will follow up with you the next business day after the board meeting. And I sent that email on July 14th.
So that's the day it came in.
Because I had never seen a packet like that before, I felt it warranted forwarding to the county and acknowledgement to the person that sent it to me, so.
Yeah, it's just super strict in here that they can fine you up to $40,000 a day if you're not within the time frame.
Yeah, so, no, I let her know that we would be.
So it wasn't,
looking at it.
so what you're saying, Brian, is that even though this was developed on June 28th, that you could have received it June 30th.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
they're telling us
And
that
her
we received
response-
it 2 weeks
her
later.
response was on the 14th.
On the 14th.
But that's not when you received it. What does,
I'm saying that's when I received it. I
Oh.
acknowledged it because I had never received anything like that before. I acknowledged it to her and I had forwarded it to the county.
okay, so it took from the, wow, that's a long time. Is it the mail?
It was a huge packet. I don't
Yeah.
know. Yes.
Okay. All right. For items of introduction, your committee, board, commissions, draft policy. All right, that's mine. What I have for that is, apparently, there was a misunderstanding, and I'll take responsibility for it, with regards to what my task was to be. I understood my task to be in the meeting that staff and I had, that Karen and I had, with regard to committees, not to the visual two-way communication. Does that make any sense? So apparently, from the minutes, I was supposed to be looking at the visual. Double check and make
The
sure.
minutes of the last meeting?
Yeah, instead of what committees, whatever people were doing, or other municipalities.
Marie, what do you mean by visual?
Well, it says, that's what it said, the visual for, yeah, thank you. Visual, literally, what you're supposed to be seeing is two-way communication. What other?
I thought this was about.
Well, that's what I thought, and after reading the minutes, maybe,
Answer.
oh, I'm sorry.
They're two separate issues, I believe.
Correct, they are.
You're bringing back the policy for the policy that you have on the agenda, but then I believe, it may have been trustee Almarigi asked, you to bring back policies from other municipalities on their policy for two-way communication, for their meetings.
Okay, so I was supposed to be doing two different
Yes,
things.
I believe
was
so,
doing
yes.
one. Now, I went back and attempted to contact other municipalities for the two-way communication, which of course, most of us know and understand, there is no two-way. They don't have it. Some of the boards, they do have, at least the ones I've talked with, I have a longer list, for the two-way. They allow the board leeway for the board to be able to access two-way if in fact they aren't there. Okay? That's kind of an interesting piece. And then others, you know, they can, what, you can attend remotely, is what it is if you're sick. For example, if Jason couldn't come, he could, according to what Mason does, they allow them remotely to do
The
it.
Open Meetings Act though allows only military.
No, they have taken on the board. They said the board has access to do that.
That's
The other-
definitely against the law now.
Well, whether it's against the law or not, they have the right to make that decision.
They don't actually have the right. They may be doing it. No, they may be doing it, Marie, but that's definitely not what the changes in the law has been allowed post-COVID.
So, no, I understand, but the ADA is starting to, go ahead.
No, clarify about the ADA, because I thought that was the wrinkle that Nicole had addressed. And
Well,
we are in
that-
violation of ADA if we're in compliance, so the answer is no.
We are not in violation of the ADA. Yeah.
Well, again, you can do, as long as you're not more restrictive, but you're less restrictive than what they're doing. So some of them, and I haven't contacted all of them, because again, I misunderstood until I read the minutes, that I was supposed to be doing both. So what you received and what our chairs received was the policy for committees. Okay? So that again was what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 municipalities that I contacted. So that was different than the two-way. So again, I just started. So if you give me another 2 weeks to contact other municipalities, most of them, of course, I'm sure probably 100% of them will say no two-way. But again, I think that has to do with what you determine for yourselves. If in fact some are allowing it for board members, that's probably the silver lining of the pandemic, was to allow that type of communication to take place. And now people like it and they want it and they should have it. So that's kind of up to us. But again, the draft that you received had to be with the committees. And that was what I put in for what our committees were doing. And I did have the list, which I was asked, that was part of my task. So I actually had 2 tasks. And I appreciate that, breaking it down. I attempted to do, like I say, after reading it, I thought, oh my gosh. So one is completed and one isn't. So, yeah.
Well, sorry, thank you for all your work on this and reaching out to area communities. That's helpful for us in making informed decisions on these types of things. I do, in regard to what's in front of us, I do have a couple questions I'm hoping you'd be willing to. So the first one, just looking at the, I think it's the second page.
Yes. Oh, I'm sure.
So that second statement on the second page, if the chairperson decides to hold a meeting without a quorum, finding that the issues can't be discussed and no vote shall be taken, each member will receive half the determined stipend.
Yes.
Does that go into, I'm just thinking about some situations where I've been, where I approached the meeting, everyone's waiting for that last member for quorum.
Correct.
And you have some conversations. I mean, does it have to be a full meeting going over the entire agenda, or is it just a partial meeting? Is it just a few minutes?
You already know there's not going to be a quorum. You're already informed that that's going to happen, but the chair still wants to meet and discuss really important issues.
Okay.
That's where the half pay comes in, and that's one of our municipalities that gave me that thought. That kind of made sense to me.
No,
You're there
I'm
attending it, but you can't make decisions, but you are informed.
Just, I'm curious about the sort of the implementation of that. So, again, worst case scenario, a crafty committee chair may feign ignorance on whether or not someone, everyone will show up. And so knowing whether or not there's going to be a meeting may not be identifiable ahead of time. So I know that happens quite frequently. It happens sometimes. I haven't seen it go out here, but I know it does happen. So the question is, when does the half stipend kick in? Is it after 10 minutes? Is it?
No, first to your statement. An email goes out to you and says there's going to be a planning commission meeting, or to John who took off. I miss him when he's not here. So you respond back and say, yes, I got your email. Okay? So your township or your chair says, I only got 6 responses, or 3 responses, or 4, whatever it was. But there's not a quorum. But the chair then determines that we have a lot of work to do. We can't make votes, we can't make decisions on what's happening, but we're still gonna have a meeting. So you know ahead of time that you're not going to have a quorum because there's been this exchange. Now, go ahead.
Just going through this,
Yeah.
say the chair doesn't get replies from all of the board members or the committee members. Is it the chair's duty to cancel the meeting if they've not received replies from a quorum of individuals replying that they can attend the meeting?
No, I would, my statement for our volunteers would be they're very, very good about whether they come or not. So I doubt seriously if the chair would not receive some communication. In fact, the planning commission is one that kind of argues with that and says that, that doesn't make sense because what if my computer goes down or the dog eats your homework, how that goes. So there isn't that communication, exactly what you're saying. So he feels that that's really constraining. My point being, the chair for that, you've already sent that out, so your computer's working, it's okay. It's somebody else's that doesn't work, so their responsibility is to call and make sure that the chair knows that they're coming or they're not coming. So there is a two-way communication that takes place. It does put an onus on the chair, no question. And it puts an onus on the member that they be there. Whoops, we're going over.
Yes, we are.
You two, where's your bell?
Well, they didn't bring it to me.
Your bell's supposed to be ringing. So I don't.
It's 9 o'clock.
It is 9 o'clock, that's what I said. It's 3 minutes after.
They just called and said, it's 9 o'clock.
So in what you're saying at 9 o'clock, it's entirely up to you if you want to complete and finish it and take a vote on it. If not, we'll put it off until the next. It is a discussion item, that's correct.
So I'd just say, not to belabor the point and the timing, I don't think we should encourage folks to meet without a quorum. I don't think we should pay them for that. I think there's confusion over what's a real meeting and not a meeting, and do we videotape it and post it if it's not a quorum? I think that pushes us into an area we don't want to be.
Okay. This was, okay, guys, so you want me to take that out? You tell me no that. You know that.
I'm gonna take this call. I'm gonna step outside.
So I'll just say that one of my concerns is that the original concern that was brought up by you in terms of a committee member that was expecting a payment but didn't receive a payment because she showed up to a meeting and
She wasn't notified, correct?
It seems like this last statement, however, if for any reason the volunteer member is not notified of a canceled meeting and is in attendance at the designated location at the time of the meeting, reimbursement in bold will not be provided to the member.
That's correct, because that's what you decided. This is the policy, okay? That's what you decided, that she was not going to be paid for that. So that's part of the policy. Okay. Any other? Let's move on. You keep glaring at me like, this is my responsibility. It is, but don't glare. I understand. So, no, we haven't adjourned for a discussion that we're having with this. Because I received nothing from any of our members on this. I did receive from 4. One said it was really good, it's a good thing to talk about. The only one that really had the question was planning commission. And all that responded were chairs, which meant that that's more of a responsibility for them, and that's a question they have. So, for the discussion, which is what this is under, I'll bring it back for the policy at the next meeting, and you can decide whether you want to accept it or reject it. But, if I'm understanding, we don't want what you're saying, I think, Jason, is to take out the language regarding the hazard.
Would you be willing to set up a conversation, just the two of us, and you?
Oh, I'm more than
I'm
willing.
worried about the time.
That's why I sent it out, was so that I would get some feedback, but didn't receive it other than from committees. So, anything below,
I have one question. Are we bringing it back at the next regular meeting or the meeting on Monday?
oh no, the regular meeting.
Okay.
So anything that's still left on here, according to our own rules, is that anything after 9 o'clock is placed on the agenda for the next regular meeting.
There is nothing else.
Well, yeah, there's comments. but-
Yeah, well, you're still gonna, public statements.
I would
And
recommend
public statements, if that's.
Are you ready?
Go ahead. You shoot.
Magrichi Outer Drive. And just a couple of, I guess, notes to the board from me, I'm a private citizen. When somebody makes a promise at a meeting in front of the cameras and everyone at 2 hours and 36 minutes into the meeting that something is going to be added to the agenda for this meeting, that it actually is added to the agenda. If somebody gives me their word, I'm gonna take that word as a given. I guess I'm a little bit ouchy about it because it's the second time that this office has given me their word, and the second time that they've reneged on it. So I'm a little bit frustrated and angry. Just letting you know as a board, the Bath Township ordinance, no, you do not have to, under the American Disabilities Act or under the Open Meetings Act, you do not have to, it is not enacted into law that you need to be accessible by your public, to your public, which is why I've been so clear about what I'm asking for. What I'm asking for is for you to purchase and implement a quality product so that people in your community can hear you, can see you, know what you're talking about. All of these things, overlays, I don't know what you're talking about because I can't see it. Or hear it. I'm asking you to do that because it's the right thing to do, not because it's been written into law. They are encouraging you to do it. But all I'm asking for right now, as all the other times, is to purchase it and implement it. You can worry about all the rest of the things that you are worried about later. You know, if you don't want to have two-way communication, don't. I wouldn't suggest that you do that because I don't think it's transparent since everybody wants to use that word these days. We haven't even been able to make it goes into discussion immediately. We can't even get a second. I mean, we'll get a minute, then it goes immediately into discussion. So we're not even able to see if anybody wants to second it. I'm very frustrated, as you all well know. Like I said, it's promises made to me that are being broken, and I'm very frustrated and discouraged, disappointed. Are there any questions or comments for me?
I have a comment if I may. Meg, thank you for continuing to bring this before us. I will say myself, I am incredibly frustrated with the AV setup. I can't do my job in terms of monitoring some of the meetings I can't attend in person. So there's been a number that I've tried to listen to and I cannot hear the whole conversation. The recordings are worse than what they were prior to the pandemic when you could actually hear. And so I for one absolutely want to see something. I don't care what it is, but it has to be improvement. Because again, we as board members, we can't attend all the meetings, and it's important for us to hear some of the details of those meetings.
I also have one comment with that. One, I appreciate you being here because I know how difficult that is. Second of all, it was determined a long time ago as to who would set the room up and who would be responsible for seating. That was done by this board. So that's something that I'm not sure the board, it's not that the board is ignoring, although I do at times, I'm with Jason, it's a little frustrating with it because that was the silver lining in the pandemic, was to allow people to have two-way conversations.
Yes.
And to cut it off like cold turkey, to me, was not a really good thing to do. However, I don't have a say in how the room is set up, even though as a board, we should determine one way or another whether we accept or reject two-way communication. It's as simple, it really is a simple vote. You either do accept two-way or you don't. How
Well,
it's- how it's-
honestly, two-way, that would even be a separate issue. If you would just agree to purchase it and
Correct.
implement it, that would be enough.
That's correct.
If you want to decide amongst yourselves to vote down the two-way, I think it's the wrong idea, but that would be up to you.
So it's hard to understand because we brought twice equipment
Yeah.
forward, and it's been either not voted on or it's been voted down.
Yep. That's
So how,
It's
Then-
never been voted down.
It has been voted
It has been
down.
voted
true.
Yeah.
The dollar amount was.
Okay, excuse me.
So,
The first
no.
time was a mix of both the equipment and the policy.
Right.
That's why it got shut down.
Voted down.
The second one, I shut
That was
down.
a dollar amount.
So I would encourage that, and I know Taylor, you were gonna do some research
Right.
on what area municipalities, what their setups are.
yes,
If
we've
you're,
done that.
if you're,
Yeah.
I would like to see that brought before us.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea, because at one time, the cameras, I think the dollar amount was like 40 grand.
That was 6 months ago.
Oh, that was
I
more than
mean,
6
no,
months ago.
well, I
It
mean,
was-
more,
yeah.
more than that, but Taylor was going to do that 6
Oh,
months ago.
okay. Well, the dollar amount of the quality of what we're looking to do, and it was mentioned that maybe consequently, there was going to be issues with people over speaking or becoming violent or whatever. I mean, I never saw that in all the time that we were Zooming. I'm not a Zoom person. I don't like flat screens. I like somebody like Steve sitting next to me as a 3D person.
I
Or
think
Brenda.
what happens each time though is all of these issues get brought in
Yes, they do.
when we haven't even got
That's
to the
correct.
discussion yet. We haven't got a motion, we haven't got a second. If we could get to that point, I think we would be doing well.
We've had a motion, we've had a second, 4 people voted no, including the supervisor.
That was because we didn't have a purchase price. Have a purchase price.
Sure.
No,
Well, that was the
No.
way I understood
Yeah,
it.
that is the way, and that was how it was. But anyway, for this conversation to go on, that's probably part of what you're looking at with your special meeting, or it should be added to the special meeting.
So that'll be the special meeting on July
Yeah,
25th.
she's the one that requested. Well,
July 25th at 6 PM.
yeah, I think, I understand what you're saying as part of the budget. But I think what Meg is trying to say is either we are gonna have it or we're not gonna have it. And then work on it from that point.
2 hours, 36 minutes.
I voted for it.
Check the date.
I was
Yeah.
against it.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You will.
Yes. All right. Is there anybody else for public
We're just
comment?
getting-
Will White.
Thank you, Meg. Yeah,
Thank you.
I figured he was kind of inching his way through.
Yeah.
so-
Will Tyler White, Main Street. I have a similar complaint, that we can't hear you. I can't sit here for the whole meeting. I had to go back to work and I listened to it on the computer. Trustee Rosecrans and Funes Bliss come through loud and clear. Everybody else, it's mumble jumble, if you can hear it at all. I don't, it looks like they have the same kind of microphone, so I don't know what the problem is. And that was part of the reason why my next complaint is that the explanation of how the DDA funds were handled was unsatisfactory and convoluted.
If you couldn't hear it, how could you tell us that?
I could hear a little bit of it.
Well, I guess you
so
couldn't
much
hear it,
to
so you
that,
couldn't tell us that, could you?
Can I finish my comments?
You can go ahead, your comments got answered by the auditor of the township.
Yeah, I was listening to you. I could hear him pretty well. It sounded like it was some kind of accounting adjustment. I couldn't.
There is no
Nope.
adjustment, it's the law.
So was the money spent on projects or
The
not?
money is still in the bank account, hasn't been spent on a nickel.
Well, why does it say that it was spent then?
It does not.
It says, page 64, it was spent on, it was an
The
expenditure.
$100,145 is the money that the township DDA owes Lansing Community College. You
Okay,
had
so
to-
it
you
was
had to-
not spent on
You have to
projects.
pay that back. That's
Okay,
what that,
so
what
that was
what
an inaccurate annotation then. It was a
Inaccurate?
tax refund to another
It's an
entity.
inaccurate, the state, the audit people from the state of Michigan, you got a perfect opinion from the Department of Treasury?
Yeah.
And you're telling me it's an inadequate statement?
That's correct.
Okay.
You just said, you just.
I mean,
agreed with
somebody
me.
timing this, because I have things to do today, and I'm not interested in listening.
All right, giving money back
But
from
he
tax
gets
money
3
back
minutes.
from.
It says right here, he
He's got
gets 3
one-
minutes.
He's got 1 minute to go.
All right, let's move forward. You're gonna make statements, and you're gonna make statements about, no, just me. You're gonna make statements about me. You better well have your information right. You went to circuit court in Clinton County,
Yeah,
and you didn't have your stuff right up there either.
yeah, I had it right.
No, you didn't.
None of the facts were, all of the facts were correct and none of
Do
them.
what you gotta do. I did what I did for the benefit of the good of Bath Township.
So getting back to the subject at hand, those funds were not expended on downtown development projects. They were a refund of taxes to another taxing entity.
They were returned to they were captured funds, the word captured, that probably doesn't mean anything to you because you don't have a lot of knowledge in this, but the word captured, they
You
were
don't need to insult me.
They were captured funds
Mr.
that were
Treasurer.
Okay.
returned to.
I understood all that and
to
I'm
the-
speaking.
to
Please
the-
don't interrupt me
to the
while I am
account.
speaking.
I
His
got
minutes
one
are
that
up,
says
are you
no.
gonna do this or are
Well,
you?
because you kept.
Took half my minutes
Don't
away.
give me that.
Just let him have his
So I
comment.
just admitted it was not expended, it was not expended on downtown development projects.
So,
It was a
that's,
tax collected from another entity that went back to them. So that title, whatever they used, as it was under expenditures, was not entirely accurate.
That's not
And then you have just admitted that.
I
So
didn't
my
admit
next
anything
point
Other than
is
the fact
that,
that you don't know what you're
This,
talking about like
my next
normal.
point is this screen up here is useless. I've never seen
no
it used.
sense of this.
And there used to be an electronic screen up here. And I'm sure you can get a new electronic screen for
If you don't
about
run the meeting, what are you gonna do? Run the meeting, the recorder, run the meeting.
He's got time, you're interrupting.
Right there, it's
You're
23
interrupting.
minutes after the 9 o'clock.
You're not letting him finish.
I'm not gonna
So-
be accused and insulted after I just got through
A
having.
new electronic screen would have been very helpful to put this up there for the people in the crowd and the people on TV that could not see that. And I'm sure that would be a lot less than this big new electronic sign out front that nobody wanted, nobody needed, nobody asked for. I know what the temperature and time is every time we drive by there. I know I'm in Bath Township. That was the stupidest thing. You could spend money, you could have spent it on a nice new screen here. The only other thing I have to say is this newsletter. This is a joke. This is the whole page promotion of the clerk. She's running for re-election. Now, if this was informational, there would be some information about the election, like, did you get your new voter's registration card? Did you know that all the districts have been changed now? Do you know what the issues are on the ballot? Do you know who the other candidates are on the ballot? Spending thousands of dollars to promote the clerk,
Your 3 minutes is.
and just a
up.
few stupid things on the back, reminders. This is not informational. This should go right in the garbage, as far as I'm concerned. Thank you for
Finish.
listening.
Thank you.
Most
Your
of
3
you.
minutes are up. All right, are we gonna adjourn?
Motion to
I
adjourn?
would like to make one statement. The 27th, they're gonna go into Meadows and start doing the blacktopping. They
So
will
stay
be
out
there
of there.
3 to 4 days. And for the budget, we're getting ready. Hawk Hollow, we did a blacktop road in there. You go, look at the next one. We're gonna have to spend some money in there this year. So,
I will make sure that that's on as a topic of discussion.
thank you.
Who's gonna make a motion?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I already made a motion.
Did you? I'll second it then.
I want credit for this motion.
Well, you guys can fight over it.
Mr.
Stay right here and do it.
Yes.
Ms. Butler Chandler, yes. Ms. Howe?
Yes.
Mr. Wisswasser?
Yes.
Mr. Benzi?
Yes.
Mr. Almarigi?
Yes.
Mr. Fields Bliss?
Yes.